Chapter 37:11. But then again, even if they thought they were fooled by Lin Yi out of their instinct to respect the strong, they still couldn't help but feel a little bit of awe. After all, it was already a big miracle that Lin Yi was able to hold on until the 6th incense stick. And at this moment, they didn't even know that the pressure on Lin Yi's head was not just 1 time, but 12 times. Su Lingchong couldn't help but gnash his teeth, secretly cursing the few law enforcement hall bastards on the stage for not putting in enough effort. Otherwise, how could so many people not be able to deal with a mere Lin Yi? However, as the people involved, the law enforcement hall experts all had livid faces at this moment. They were almost driven crazy by Lin Yi. One had to know that it was very strenuous for them to hold on to 12 times the pressure. If this went on, they would be in big trouble before Lin Yi collapsed. With so many law enforcement hall experts joining hands to deal with a mere newcomer in the welcoming pavilion, if not only did they fail to kill or cripple the other party, but they were also injured by the backlash, it would really make people laugh their heads off. 12 times the pressure was already the limit of what they could control. However, according to Lin Yi's calm demeanor, not to mention 1 or 2 more incense sticks, it didn't seem to be a problem for him to continue sitting here for a year and a half. Today was really fucking strange. Now that things had developed to this point, these law enforcement hall experts were now riding a tiger, and it was hard to get off. They could only bite the bullet and continue to hold on. Otherwise, there was no way they could explain to Su Lingchong. Lin Yi could calmly deal with 12 times the pressure? If this kind of words were said, not to mention that no one would believe it, they would even think that it was an insult to their intelligence. In fact, even the people involved felt that it was unbelievable, and they couldn't help but start to doubt in their hearts. Was there something wrong with this pressure formation? Otherwise, there was no way to explain the strange situation before them. Boy, do you want to continue? I have nothing to do anyway, so I'm happy to play with them. The ghost laughed strangely in Lin Yi's mind. Lin Yi laughed in his heart when he heard this. He realized that ever since he came to Heaven Stage Island, the ghostly thing's condition was obviously much better than when it was in the secular world. But thinking about it, it probably had something to do with the surrounding environment. Now, he was even in the mood to play and bully these little law enforcement hall kids in high spirits. In the face of this ghostly being, who was a top-notch elder of the Spirit Beast clan, these so-called law enforcement hall powerhouses were nothing more than children. To be able to use the pressure formation to indirectly exchange blows with an elder-level expert, they really didn't know whether this should be considered their honor or their sorrow. That's right, the one who was fighting against the 12-fold pressure wasn't Lin Yi himself, but that damn thing. He was once an elder of the Spirit Beast clan. He was one of the top experts in the entire Heavenly Stage Island. Even if this damn thing only had a soul left, it would still be a piece of cake for him to deal with this level of pressure. The so-called 12 times pressure was nothing in his eyes. As for Lin Yi, the person involved in everyone's eyes, he didn't feel any pressure at all at this moment. It was no different from when he was meditating and cultivating in the cave residence. In the eyes of outsiders, he was naturally calm and at ease. But the others didn't know that Lin Yi had something hidden on him. If a god like him continued to sit like this, even if the people in the audience didn't know the inside story, they'd still be in awe of him, and at the same time, they'd be suspicious of him. If things went wrong, they'd start all sorts of rumors, and that would be trouble. As for the law enforcement hall powerhouses who were also involved, although they were far more shocked than others, Lin Yi wasn't afraid that they would spread any gossip. After all, what they did couldn't be exposed to the public. If it was known by others, they would be the first unlucky ones. Looking at the 6th incense stick that was about to be lit, Lin Yi smiled slightly and responded to the ghost with his divine sense. Senior, stop when the 7th incense stick is lit. After the time it took for 6 incense sticks to burn. It meant that he could get 30 points within the time limit. In addition to the 15 points of the first place, Lin Yi had already got the theoretical full score of 45 points. Even if he continued to persist, the points wouldn't increase anymore. It was meaningless. Oh, boy, you know when to stop. The ghostly thing chuckled and said, fine, since you've said so, this old man won't meddle. However, after playing with them for so long, I have to leave them some souvenirs. Lin Yi smiled secretly. Although he didn't know what the ghost was going to do, he could already start to mourn for these law enforcement hall powerhouses. Needless to say, the ghost's means must be extraordinary. When the 6th incense stick burned out and the 7th incense stick was lit under everyone's surprised eyes, Lin Yi was still meditating. On the other hand, the law enforcement hall powerhouses who were responsible for controlling the intensity of the coercion were all sweating profusely. It was obvious that they couldn't hold on any longer. The few of them couldn't help but look at each other. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. Why don't we let this brat go for now and stop for the time being? At most we'll be scolded by young Master Su. It's not like we'll be dragged into this mess for a mere newcomer. However, just as they were about to stop, the intensity of the coercion suddenly began to rise uncontrollably. In an instant, it broke through the limit of 12 times and began to rapidly approach 15 times and 16 times. In less than a breath's time, it reached an unprecedented height of 20 times. Several law enforcement hall powerhouses suddenly turned pale with fright. Then, before they could react, Lin Yi, who they had been scheming to deal with, stood up and walked down the high platform with ease. This guy was finally willing to come down. The crowd was in an uproar. In the first round of the assessment, Lin Yi was the only newcomer from the 3 pavilions who could get the full 45 points. Even if they were all angered by Lin Yi's teasing, his strength was still there. No matter how aggrieved and dissatisfied they were, in the face of such a godlike performance, they could only say one word: respect. Chapter 37:12. As for the Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomer who had a direct competitive relationship with Lin Yi, Meng Tong, who ranked second in this segment, only had 24 points, closely followed by Xiao Ran with 23 points, and Xiao Hongkai with 22 points. All of them were pulled away by a large margin by Lin Yi. Junior apprentice brother Lin, you really scared us to death just now. Senior apprentice brother Ku and the others crowded around Lin Yi and complained jokingly. To be honest, they were indeed anxious and scared off stage just now. Not only were they worried for Lin Yi, but they were also worried for themselves at the same time. Don't forget, although senior apprentice brother Ku's status was higher on the surface, Lin Yi was the backbone of their group. If anything happened to Lin Yi, it was simply impossible for them to fight against Meng Jueguang and the others with just the few of them. At that time it would really be hard to endure. Lin Yi smiled faintly and said, "Ha! I told you guys long ago, I know what I'm doing and won't act recklessly." Senior apprentice brother Ku and the others looked at each other and smiled bitterly. In this kind of situation just now, how could they not be worried? Instead, it was Xiao Hongkai who chuckled and said, "After all, it's our boss Lin Yi. A god-level performance with full marks is nothing difficult at all. This result is completely within my expectations, so I'm not worried at all." Beside him, Xiao Ran glanced at him and added a sentence faintly, "Yes, you just trembled when you spoke just now, fuck. I'm just exhausted, alright? I'm not worried that something will happen to boss Lin Yi." Xiao Hongkai cried out strangely. Lin Yi and the others could not help but smile. Other than being nervous in their hearts, who would freaking be exhausted to the point of trembling while speaking? This guy really did not mean what he said. Compared to Lin Yi and the others who were chatting cheerfully, Su Lingchong, Hu Yunfeng and Meng Jueguang had ugly expressions on their faces. Don't forget that they had just ridiculed Lin Yi for overestimating himself in front of everyone. Now look at what happened. Lin Yi walked down the stage with full marks, and the words he said just now naturally became a sharp slap to their own faces. Their cheeks hurt, but Lin Yi's words were like a slap to their own faces. The pain was unforgettable. It was rare to see someone slap their own face so cleanly and ruthlessly. Just as all the rookies were surrounding Lin Yi, who had scored full marks for the divine level, and were discussing and sighing with relish, the group of law enforcement hall experts who could have called it a day suddenly stopped. At this moment they were stuck in a quagmire, unable to extricate themselves. Their faces were filled with disbelief and fear. What are these idiots doing up there? Did he not dare to come down because he was too ashamed to face him? Chapter 37:13. This person's strength should be comparable to an elder-level expert, Lin Yi thought to himself. However, although this person looked young, his true age should not be young. Otherwise, no matter how talented he was, it was impossible for him to have such powerful strength. The young man's eyes then fell on the few law enforcement hall experts. Seeing their sorry state, he frowned slightly and said, "A bunch of trash." After saying that, he stretched out his hand and waved it in the air, and the super strong pressure that was pressing down on them was instantly swept away, and the pressure formation also quietly returned to its original state, as if it had never been operated at full strength. The few law enforcement hall experts struggled back from the brink of death. Without adjusting their breathing, they hurriedly knelt in front of the young man and respectfully said in unison, "Greetings, Hall Master." The group of newcomers below the stage immediately looked at each other. Those who were slightly more knowledgeable had already guessed the identity of this young man. He was actually the famous current Hall Master of the Law Enforcement Hall, Ram Jia. It was said that this Ram Jia was a publicly recognized genius of the 3 pavilions in hundreds of years. He was currently 38 years old, but his strength was comparable to an elder-level expert. He was the youngest hall master in the history of the law enforcement hall. At the same time, he was also the most cold-blooded hall master in the history of the law enforcement hall. Lin Yi had previously heard Senior Brother Ku Bai mention this person. It had only been 3 years since he took office, but he had relied on his powerful methods to manage the law enforcement hall, which had many factions, into a monolithic entity. More importantly, in these 3 years, 2 of the elders of the 3 pavilions had been beaten to the ground by him for various crimes. This was something that his predecessor had not been able to do for decades. Knowing someone by reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. This person was indeed not simple. Lin Yi sighed in his heart. Suddenly he noticed that Li Jingming, who was not far from him, seemed to be a little strange. He seemed a little nervous? Lin Yi was immediately puzzled. A high and mighty figure like Ram Jie should not have any interaction with him, Li Jingming, a small great perfection of heaven stage newcomer. What was there to be nervous about? But on second thought, with Li Jingming's background, Li Jingming's family background was not something to be proud of. When the Qiushui Manor was annihilated, the law enforcement hall was pressured by the mastermind behind the scenes, which was a certain elder surnamed Li. However, at that time, Gong Yangjie had yet to take over the law enforcement hall. If Ram Jie, the iron-fisted man, had been in charge of the investigation, the result might have been completely different. What Lin Yi did not know was, Li Jingming's current dilemma was not because he regretted that Ram Jie didn't take over the law enforcement hall at that time, but because of an even more frightening reason. However, before he could gain enough strength, he could only bury his hatred deep in his heart, no matter how great it was. He did not dare to show any signs of abnormality. Otherwise, what awaited him would be a disaster. Li Jingming suddenly turned his head and looked at Lin Yi meaningfully. From what he knew, in the future, there would be no one in the 3 great pavilions who could compete with a genius like Ram Jie. However, if it was Lin Yi's boss who had done amazing things time and time again, when he grew up in the future, there might be a slight possibility. Oh, Boss Lin Yi could be like the miracle pill Dr. Zhang Liju in the mortal world, soaring to the sky. What happened? Ram Jie's calm tone did not contain a trace of emotion, but the feeling it gave people was an inexplicable pressure, making people unable to have any thoughts of disobeying him. The few law enforcement hall experts on the ground looked at each other, and one of them answered carefully, reporting to Master, "We are in charge of cooperating with the newcomer assessment of the welcoming pavilion, but the pressure formation suddenly went out of control. The reason is unknown." The reason is unknown? Ram Jie's cold eyes swept across them, making their hair stand on end. If it wasn't for the fact that they only did something to Lin Yi. If they really didn't know why the pressure formation suddenly went out of control, just this look alone would make them reveal the truth. As the master of the law enforcement hall, if Ram Jie wanted to pry some secrets out of their mouths, it would be a piece of cake. We really don't know. They quickly lowered their heads even more. Ram Jie didn't say anything, but looking at his expression, he didn't have the intention to investigate further. After all, the pressure formation involved the arrangement of all the pavilions in the entire law enforcement hall. While it was powerful, any slight movement in any part of it could affect the operation of the entire formation. It was common for the formation to go out of control. The few law enforcement hall experts who were kneeling on the ground heaved a sigh of relief. Although they didn't lie to Ram Jie in any way, they did hide the matter regarding Lin Yi. If this master were to investigate further, they would be skinned alive, even if they didn't die. Ram Jie coldly glanced at the people in the welcoming pavilion and said, "The law enforcement hall doesn't welcome irrelevant people. Since it's over, quickly chase these irrelevant people away." Hearing this, the newcomers below the stage immediately breathed heavily, and they couldn't help but feel resentful. Although this fellow was powerful, his words were too condescending, weren't they? At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Hu Yunfeng. He was the master of the welcoming pavilion, their leader, so naturally he should be the one to show up. However, Hu Yunfeng turned a deaf ear from the beginning to the end. He didn't even dare to let out a fart. Admittedly, the welcoming pavilion and the law enforcement hall were both independent halls of the 3 great pavilions. Putting aside their respective strengths, in theory, as the pavilion master of the welcoming pavilion, his position was the same as the hall master of the law enforcement hall. Moreover, the newcomer assessment had been approved by the Elders Guild, so he had the capital to argue with the other party. However, the other party was the famous Ram Jie. He, Hu Yunfeng, was at most a slightly stronger ant in the other party's eyes. To challenge such a fierce god, what kind of joke was that? If he really dared to do so, the law enforcement hall might invite him as a guest tomorrow and dig out all his secrets. When that happened, he would just be waiting to die. After saying this, Gong Yangjie didn't even look at anyone else. In a flash, his figure flashed off the high platform. In the next moment, he had already disappeared from everyone's sight. Everyone unconsciously heaved a sigh of relief. It was as if a huge mountain had suddenly disappeared from their bodies. The pressure that Gong Yangjie brought to them, to a certain extent, was comparable to the pressure test from before. It was even more so. Chapter 37:14. At this moment, Meng Jueguang suddenly said something that diverted everyone's attention. Lord Pavilion Master, since the suppression array has lost control, should we recalculate the scores for this assessment? The moment this was said, there was an uproar once again. The suppression array had lost control, which meant that the assessment from before was inaccurate. In theory, there was a need for a reassessment. And Meng Jueguang's motive for saying this was very obvious. He was taking the opportunity to help Hu Yunfeng out of a predicament, and at the same time he was targeting Lin Yi. This was because if there was a reassessment, the person who would suffer the most would be him, the person who had obtained full marks. However, Lin Yi responded with a faint smile. He did not have any intention to object. After all, he did not rely on luck to obtain the points he had. Even if there were a few more rounds, he would still obtain full marks. The outcome would not be any different from now. Hu Yunfeng pondered for a moment when he heard this and turned to look at Su Lingchong. What do you think, young Master Su? You are their senior brother, and as a bystander your opinion will definitely be more pertinent. The rookies could not help but secretly despise him. This Lord Pavilion Master was not only a coward, but he was also good at sucking up. To be able to sit in such a position, he indeed had some ability. Unfortunately, it was not any proper ability. Su Lingchong, on the other hand, looked at the few experts of the Hall of Law on the stage. If they couldn't help him take the opportunity to deal with Lin Yi, it would be meaningless no matter how many times he repeated it. He immediately asked, "What do you think?" The few law enforcement hall experts looked at each other and gave a wry smile. Just one round and he was already in such a miserable state. Another round? Wouldn't that cost him his life? Furthermore, Ram Jie had just said that the law enforcement hall did not welcome miscellaneous people. If they were to help welcome Pavilion reassess, wouldn't that be openly going against Ram Jie's intentions? This was not a joke. The leader could only step forward and say, "Young Master Su." Also, Pavilion Master Hu Yunfeng, the array actually lost control for an instant. It was normal before, so there is no need to reassess. Su Lingchong was stunned when he heard this. He glanced at the few people who seemed to be hiding something. He nodded to Hu Yunfeng without saying anything else. Seeing this, Hu Yunfeng said, "Since that's the case, then it's settled. Let's return to the welcoming pavilion first. Also, junior brother Kong, I'll have to trouble you to publish the points of every newcomer on the leaderboard. When the time comes, we can compare them." After giving the order, the rookies, under the guidance of their steward senior brothers, hurriedly left the law enforcement hall, a place that made them feel extremely repressed. They returned to recuperate and prepare for the second assessment round in 3 days. When Lin Yi left with senior brother Ku Bai and the others, he exchanged a glance with Shanghai Laner and secretly made a grateful gesture. After all, this little senior sister had come here today to support him, so it was only right for her to thank him. However, Shanghai Laner still had to pretend to hate him on the surface, so she could only secretly signal him with hand gestures. Humph. Shangguan Laner deliberately responded with a cold snort, but in her heart she was secretly happy for Lin Yi and her mood was very good. Today not only did Su Lingchong, this extremely annoying fellow, fail to harm Lin Yi. Instead, Lin Yi miraculously obtained a full score, which was simply too satisfying. After the newcomers left the welcoming pavilion, Shanghai Laner also followed them and left. Only Su Lingchong stayed behind in the name of caring for his law enforcement hall friends. His purpose was naturally to inquire about the inside story. "What the hell are you guys doing? You've turned a deaf ear to my words. Don't tell me that you can't even deal with a mere Lin Yi." Su Lingchong looked at the few law enforcement hall experts in a sorry state, and his anger rose. Today he had promised Shanghai Laner that he would deal with Lin Yi, but in the end, not only was Lin Yi unscathed, he even obtained a full score in such a grand manner. Moreover, he had gracefully obtained a full score. Where would he, young Master Su, put his face? Shanghai Laner didn't pay much attention to him. Today she had lost her face and in the future she wouldn't give him a good face. Little did she know that as long as he said that he wanted to deal with Lin Yi, Shanghai Laner would definitely follow him. No matter how much Shangguan Laner hated him, she would definitely follow him when the time came. After all, she was his little senior sister who had to protect him. The few law enforcement hall experts looked at each other helplessly. Although this young Master Su had a deep background and couldn't be provoked, when facing him they didn't tremble with fear like they did when facing Ram Jia, and they felt somewhat embarrassed. The person in the lead replied in a deep voice, "Young Master Su, we really did our best just now, otherwise we wouldn't have lost control of the array. Moreover, you saw the situation just now with your own eyes. If it wasn't for Hall Leader Gong Yang helping us in time, we would already be corpses at this time. How could Lin Yi still be unscathed? You all did your best but you still let him get a full score?" Su Lingchong said with a puzzled face. In fact, he didn't believe that these people would turn a deaf ear to his words. After all, they were old acquaintances who had known each other for a long time. These people could now work in the law enforcement hall, which was revered by everyone because of their relationship with his grandfather, Su Yuanzheng. There was no reason for them to offend him so perfunctorily for a newcomer they didn't know. This question not only Su Lingchong was puzzled, even these law enforcement hall experts were puzzled. If the array was said to be out of their control after the 12-fold suppression, then what about before that? Obviously, everything was under their control. If it was said that Lin Yi, a newcomer in the early stage of foundation establishment, could calmly withstand the 12-fold suppression, that would be too fake. This possibility simply didn't exist. There must have been some problems in the process, but they just didn't notice it at that time. The few of them looked at each other for a long time, and one of them thought for a while and said, "Young Master Su and brothers, just now at the fourth incense stick, that Lin Yi once wanted to stand up and leave. From his various performances at that time, it was obvious that he couldn't hold on anymore, but halfway through we don't know why he sat back down again. Don't you think this matter is very strange?" "All right." The few of them suddenly slapped their heads. At that time they had thought that Lin Yi was acting recklessly and coveting points. Now that they thought about it, it was indeed very strange. So I think it's very likely that at that time, the array was already out of our control. Perhaps after that there wasn't any suppression on his body at all, and that's why he could appear so relaxed. But we didn't notice it at all and still continued to increase the intensity of the suppression, which caused the array to completely lose control, causing all of us to suffer the backlash. This person summarized and analyzed. Chapter 37:15. Even Su Lingchong, who was standing under the stage and watching coldly, felt that it made sense when he recalled it. Otherwise, there was no way to explain why Lin Yi, who obviously couldn't hold on in the middle, immediately returned to his calm state. So, this time, Lin Yi took advantage of the loophole inexplicably and got lucky? Although Su Lingchong believed this explanation, he was still a little upset. That's true. So this time, young Master Su, you really can't blame us for not trying our best. After all, man proposes, God disposes. Several people sighed. Then why didn't you just ask them to reassess? In that case we would have a chance to punish Lin Yi again. Su Lingchong frowned and said. He didn't feel anything when he didn't take Lin Yi seriously. Now that he was really thinking of ways to deal with Lin Yi, he was very unhappy that Lin Yi took advantage of the loophole and escaped. Lin Yi was now a thorn in his side. If he didn't get rid of him, his thoughts wouldn't be smooth. Several masters of the law enforcement hall looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Young Master Su, you saw our state. If we don't adjust and rest for a few days, we won't be able to recover. Moreover, you heard what Hall Master Ram said. How dare we disobey him? This time Su Lingchong had nothing to say. This matter involved a powerful figure like Ram Jia. Even he couldn't do anything. In fact, even if his grandfather Su Yuanjing came in person, Ram Jia might not listen to him, let alone a young master like him. After all, he was the #1 person in the new generation of the 3 pavilions in the North Island. If he continued to develop like this, it was almost certain that he would become the leader of the 3 pavilions in the future. Even a giant of the Elders' Union like Su Yuanzheng could only politely call him junior brother when facing him. Come to think of it, with young Master Su's power, it's as easy as pinching a bug to deal with such a small figure. Furthermore, their rookie assessment doesn't only have this one segment. In the next segment, wouldn't it be easier to do something to kill him? A few people suggested. The rookie assessment had a total of 6 segments. Strictly speaking, the first segment was the pressure test. It wasn't easy to take the opportunity to kill someone. On the contrary, it would be easier to create an accident to kill Lin Yi in the later stages, especially the second stage. Well said. Su Lingchong's eyes instantly lit up and he said straightforwardly, the second segment is set to be 3 days from now. The few of you should have recovered by now. Anyway, Hu Yunfeng also wants to find an expert to be the examiner, so I might as well let the few of you make the trip. After all, there is no need to trouble two people for the same thing. Good, we have the same intention. The few of them looked at each other, their eyes filled with malice. At the end of the day, it was Lin Yi's fault that they ended up in this state. Naturally, they had to get back at Lin Yi. Su Lingchong nodded his head. Alright, I'll get Meng Jueguang and the rest to discuss with you guys 3 days later. They have deep grudges with Lin Yi, and they have a deeper understanding of Lin Yi's various weaknesses. This time we must ensure that nothing goes wrong. He had already lost face in front of Shangguan Laner once, and he definitely couldn't lose it a second time. Putting aside the fact that Su Lingchong and the others were gnashing their teeth and planning to deal with Lin Yi, the person involved, didn't care about these people at all. This was the truth. With Lin Yi's true strength and all kinds of trump cards, as long as Su Lingchong didn't take the risk and directly send people to assassinate him, even if he used all kinds of tricks to deal with him at other times, he might not be able to do anything to him in the end. Plus he had planted 2 spies, Zhong Pingliang and Li Jingming. As long as he could get the information in time, he'd be able to get it. As long as he could obtain information in time, no matter how exquisite the plot was, once it was exposed, it was just a joke in the end. Not long after returning to the welcoming pavilion, Kang Ming, the rookie deacon, quickly posted the score of the first segment on the announcement board, and immediately attracted a group of newcomers to stop and watch. Some were proud, some were sighing. Some were calm, some were anxious, and it was a vivid performance of all living beings. Since the 3 pavilions each had their own score, the newcomers only paid attention to the score of their own pavilion. In the Blue Cloud Pavilion, Lin Yi's God-tier full score was naturally the best, leaving Meng Tong in the dust, including the second place far behind him. Looking at this score and listening to the praise and envy of others for Lin Yi's full score, Meng Tong, who was originally complacent and swore to crush Lin Yi to get to first place, was seething with anger. Lin Yi had 45 points and he only had 24 points. This was only the first segment, but he had pulled away by 21 points in an instant. Such a huge gap meant that in the next 5 segments, if Lin Yi didn't make any serious mistakes, no matter how hard Meng Tong worked, he might not be able to make up for it. In fact, with Meng Tong's strength in the early stage of foundation building, even if he had just broken through and his foundation wasn't stable, if he didn't get involved in some unlucky incident, he could at least last for 3 incense sticks of time, or even 4 incense sticks of time like Kang Ming and Zhong Pingliang. That way, even if he couldn't compare to Lin Yi's God-tier full score, he wouldn't be so far behind. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. If a person was unlucky, even a sip of cold water could be stuffed in the gap between the teeth, and it couldn't be stopped. Encountering this kind of thing, Meng Tong could only blame his bad luck. Blame Su Lingchong, young Master Su? Even if he had 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to do that. Ninth cousin, you have to help me think of a way, or else it won't look good for both of us if this idiot Lin Yi rides on our heads. Meng Tong didn't have a way himself, and could only turn to Meng Jueguang for help. Meng Jueguang glanced at Lin Yi, who was surrounded by his bitter senior brothers, and sneered, "Why are you in such a hurry? This is only the first segment, and there are still many opportunities to kill him. As long as he dies, so what if he gets more points? Are you going to give the first place to a dead man? Kill Lin Yi? Can that be done?" Meng Tong was shocked when he heard this. Although he had been going against Lin Yi, at most he wanted to step on Lin Yi to get back at him. He had never thought of killing Lin Yi directly. In fact, not only him, even Meng Jueguang didn't have this idea before. Chapter 37:16. But it was different now. Because they had a common enemy, Lin Yi, they were no longer alone. Instead they had a deep background. This was because they now had Su Lingchong, young Master Su, backing them up. Wanting Lin Yi to die was not only their intention, but also young Master Su's will. With young Master Su's deep background, even if he used conspiracies to kill a rookie, as long as he didn't simply find someone to assassinate and leave behind evidence, it was enough to settle the subsequent effects without any fatal risks. Therefore, in the past, Meng Jueguang and the others could only take advantage of Lin Yi on a small scale. They didn't dare to make any big moves, but now Lin Yi had to die. As long as young Master Su wants him dead, he will definitely die. So you have to take a long-term view. Don't be short-sighted and stare at a few points. Think of a way to kill Lin Yi as soon as possible. That's the key, understand? Meng Jueguang earnestly instructed. Oh, ninth cousin is brilliant. You can see the problem right away. Meng Tong immediately looked enlightened. That's for sure. If I don't have such foresight, how can I be the 3rd pavilion master in the future? Meng Jueguang smiled proudly and said, "Just now, young Master Su sent me a message. He said that he contacted the experts from the law enforcement hall and asked us to come up with a plan to kill Lin Yi in the next assessment. But before that, we have to first study this kid's biggest weakness. As long as we find his weakness, it will be hard for him to not die this time. You've been dealing with him for so long. Tell me, what is this kid's biggest weakness?" Biggest weakness? Meng Tong tilted his head and thought for a moment. After a while, he shook his head weakly and said, "This guy doesn't seem to have any big weaknesses? As the biggest rival of the Blue Cloud Pavilion rookies, he should be one of the people who understood Lin Yi the best. However, judging from his past performances, he couldn't find a fatal weakness in Lin Yi. The only weakness was that this guy could not distinguish good jade from bad jade, but this weakness could only be used to take advantage of him. Wanting to use this to kill him was too unrealistic. No, everyone has a fatal weakness, so this kid definitely has one too. It's just that we haven't noticed it yet." Meng Jueguang shook his head decisively. He turned around and called Li Jingming, who was not far from them. "Jingming, what do you think is Lin Yi's biggest weakness?" After several previous incidents, especially after he successfully tested the strength of Lin Yi's early-stage foundation establishment, Meng Jueguang was quite at ease with Li Jingming, so he didn't intend to hide this kind of confidential matter. It just so happened that they could brainstorm and think of a solution together. Li Jingming was stunned. He had just discovered that the two of them were whispering and guessed that they were planning something unspeakable. He wanted to get closer to eavesdrop on any information, but he didn't expect to be called over and even asked for his opinion. It was exactly what he wanted. Lin Yi's weakness? Does being lecherous count? Li Jingming replied without batting an eyelid. Lecherous? That is indeed a weakness. Unfortunately, it can only sow discord between him and Miss Shangguan like last time. It won't be of any use in the following rounds of the assessment, and it's even more impossible to kill him. Meng Jueguang said with some disappointment. These two people were indeed planning to deal with boss Lin Yi. Li Jingming immediately understood. He then deliberately fell into deep thought and didn't continue speaking. The few of them frowned and thought for a long time. In the end, they still couldn't figure it out. Meng Jueguang suddenly changed the topic and said, "If we can't think of any fatal weakness of Lin Yi in such a short time, maybe we can change our way of thinking. What does this kid like to do most usually?" Meng Tong's eyes lit up. He immediately replied, "I know this, of course, to show off. I hate seeing him show off the most, it's practically asking for a beating." Since Meng Tong had already helped to answer, Li Jingming was also happy to push the boat with the current. Yes, from his previous performance, Lin Yi really likes to show off. Although he said so, he was actually sneering in his heart. Boss Lin Yi was obviously able to maintain his composure no matter what he encountered because of his powerful strength. How could this be considered as showing off? Then you, Meng Tong, can't even see the depth of the other party's strength, yet you fantasize about stepping on the other party all day long. What does this count as? That's right. Meng Jueguang clapped his hands and said, "Why did we call this kid a newbie to show off previously? It's because this kid is showing off all the time. In other words, showing off has already become a habit of his. If used properly, this will be his fatal weakness." How should this be used? Meng Tong still didn't understand. However, Meng Jueguang kept him in suspense and said mysteriously, "We'll talk about this when we plan with young Master Su and the rest in 2 days. With young Master Su's influence and my Meng Jueguang's scheme, this time, Lin Yi won't be able to survive the second round." Looking at Meng Jueguang's posture of an expert who had everything under his control, Meng Tong hurriedly flattered him. As for Li Jingming, at the same time he was laughing in his heart. It seemed that in 2 days' time he would be able to send boss Lin Yi another valuable piece of information. 3 days' time was not long, but it was not short either. In these 3 days, almost all the newbies in the welcoming pavilion spent their time extremely busy. Apart from dealing with the injuries left from the first pressure test and nursing their bodies, they also had to make last-minute efforts to make their final preparations. Those who originally had high points had to strive to maintain their lead, while those who originally had low points had to think of ways to catch up as soon as possible. In short, everyone wanted to be at the top and no one wanted to fall behind. However, compared to the busy newbies, Lin Yi was the only exception that made people's jaws drop. Apart from the normal daily cultivation, this guy not only did not do any special training for the second round of assessment, he even leisurely went to Spirit Jade Hall to mine. This was simply inconceivable. One must know that in order to accommodate the newbies' assessment, Spirit Jade Hall allowed the newbies not to report for these 3 days. But this guy, Linny actually took the initiative to go mining. If this was spread out, it would simply make everyone laugh their teeth off. Don't forget, this guy was the unlucky bastard who was assigned to the 10th dead mining area. Even if his luck was good, he might not even be able to earn a piece of spirit jade after working hard for a month. Putting aside the crucial newbie's assessment but going to the dead mining area to mine, this kind of brainless feat could only be described with an illusion, throwing away the watermelon and picking up the sesame seeds. Chapter 37:17. Unbeknownst to them, Linny could go to the 10th mining area and steal 2 or 3 pieces of scrap jade every day. Once he changed hands, they would become good jades full of spiritual chi. This was much more beneficial than people like them. What was worth mentioning in these 3 days was that the 10 pieces of spirit jade that Linny got as a reward for being first in the back mountain test were all swamped by the newcomers like sharks that smelled blood after Li Jingming took the lead last time. In just 3 short days they traded away all of them with scrap jades, not a single one left behind. Adding on the spoils he'd accumulated over the past few days, Linny now had close to 450 pieces of spirit jades on hand. Although he was still quite a bit off from the star inkstone's price of 1,000 spirit jades, there was still some time until the next opening of the inner streets, and so Linny wasn't in a rush. In reality, even if he did not have enough spirit jade, he still had a way to make up for it. Of course, if he could directly save up enough spirit jade before then, that would be ideal. No matter what, that piece of star inkstone that could only be chanced upon was something that Linny was determined to obtain. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye, and all the newcomers from the 3 great pavilions once again gathered in the main hall of the welcoming pavilion. All of them rubbed their palms together, full of ambition. And what was different from the first test of resisting pressure was that this second test did not require them to go anywhere else. They only needed to go to the welcoming pavilion's own territory to complete it. The second test format was quite similar to the first test of resisting pressure, but the content of the test was different. The test this time was the most basic of all cultivators, but at the same time, it was something that was often overlooked by many people: defensive ability. Before hitting someone, one had to first learn how to take a hit. Otherwise, no matter how strong one's abilities were, one would still be a cripple with uneven development, and it was very easy for others to grasp their fatal weakness. This was a principle that even the hooligans on the streets knew. And the high and mighty cultivators present naturally would not be unaware of this. However, no matter how clear this principle was, it did not mean that they were willing to put in hard work in this area. The reason was very simple. No matter how one looked at it, this was definitely an arduous and unrewarding task. Not to mention that there were not many high-grade defensive martial skills to begin with. Even if they were lucky enough to obtain one, they might not be willing to spend a great deal of effort and pay a great price to cultivate it, because in the end, defense was always passive. If others didn't attack you, no matter how heaven-defying your defense was, it would still be a useless decoration. After all, a defensive ability was not as intimidating as a strong offensive ability. Experts of the same level, after practicing a strong offensive martial technique, would not be able to withstand it. They could kill others and steal their treasures. They could adventure in secret realms and obtain more cultivation resources. They could level up quickly, forming the legendary snowball effect. But what could a defense-type expert do? Apart from being able to keep himself alive, he couldn't do anything else. Not to mention encountering stronger opponents. Even if he was facing an expert of the same level, he could only fall into the awkward situation of passively taking a beating. The only advantage was that he was able to take a little more hits than others. If he met a stronger opponent and faced an even stronger attack, what use would his so-called strong defense be? A tortoise's shell would be broken one day. The only difference was that it would take a little longer, that's all. This was not just a matter of face. More importantly, it was very easy for him to fall behind and become a stepping stone for other experts of the same level to step on. And to say the least, even if he was in a small team where everyone had their own specialties and cooperated with each other, a superior defensive ability could indeed achieve unexpected results. However, once a fatal danger appeared, as a defense-type expert in the team, wouldn't he have to stand in front of everyone? To put it nicely, such a person was a strong shield. To put it bluntly, he was just cannon fodder. Once a fatal danger appeared, the first to die would definitely be the defense-type expert standing in front. Putting himself in others' shoes, who would be willing to be such a useless character who would become the first choice of cannon fodder in a critical moment? Everyone had their own selfish motives. Therefore, in the process of cultivation, most people would unanimously make the same choice. Even if they knew that defense was very important, they would still put most of their energy into offense and movement techniques. They would never put too much effort into defense, even if it meant leaving a fatal flaw in their defense. This was not stupidity. It was a helpless choice forced by reality. If they did not do this, it was very likely that they wouldn't even be able to reach the height they were today, let alone have a bright future. However, although the theory that defense was useless was a bloody reality recognized by the entire cultivation world, there was also a consensus in the cultivation world, and that was that a true top-notch powerhouse would always be proficient in both offense and defense, and would never have a weakness in defense. If one was only strong in offense and did not have any achievements in defense, then even if this person could become famous for a while, he would definitely not live for too long. This was because any expert of the same level could kill him with a sneak attack. However, experts who were good at both offense and defense did not have this concern. That was why they could live longer, and naturally their fame would be greater. The three great pavilions spent all kinds of resources to cultivate these newcomers, not because they wanted to cultivate fake experts who only knew how to attack and not defend. What they needed was real experts who were good at both offense and defense, and could become the mainstay of the group. Therefore, in the crucial newcomer assessment, it was very normal for this kind of defense-related assessment to appear. And this time, the way to test one's defense ability could be said to be simple and crude. Could be described in one word: getting beaten up. Every newcomer participating in the assessment could freely choose a level of strength to attack with all their might. As long as they could withstand it and recover within a certain period of time, they would be able to obtain the corresponding assessment points. Similar to the first pressure resistance assessment, the assessment points for this round were also composed of two parts. One was strength points, which corresponded to the chosen level of strength. The peak late stage of heaven stage corresponded to 5 points, the peak heaven stage corresponded to 10 points, the early stage of foundation establishment corresponded to 20 points, and the peak early stage of foundation establishment corresponded to 30 points. As for those above that, there were no points. After all, the newcomers present were at most early stage foundation establishment experts. It was already very rare for them to be able to withstand a full force attack from an early stage foundation establishment expert head-on. As for a full force attack from a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, even people like Kang Ming Ming had a 90% chance of being killed in one hit. Chapter 37:18. Apart from strength points, the other part was recovery points. That was how long it took to recover from an attack of the same level. The shorter the recovery time, the higher the points. The calculation method of recovery points corresponded to strength points. The points were obtained by multiplying the recovery time by the corresponding ratio. For example, if someone chose to attack with full strength at the early stage of foundation establishment, then his strength points would be 20 points. If he needed 2 hours to recover, it would mean that it was a minor injury. The recovery points would be equivalent to 100% of strength points, which was also 20 points. If he needed half a day to recover, it would mean that it was a minor injury. The recovery points would be 80% of strength points, which was 16 points. If he needed a day to recover, it would mean that it was a moderate injury. The recovery points would be 60% of strength points, which was 12 points. If he needed 3 days to recover, it would mean that it was a serious injury. The recovery points would be 40% of strength points, which was 8 points. If he needed more than 3 days to recover, it would mean that his injury was extremely serious. The recovery points would be 20% of strength points, which was 4 points. If he did not recover after 10 days, his points would be 0, because his defense was simply too weak. He was just lucky that he did not die. The sum of strength points and recovery points was the total score of the second assessment. This way of calculating points could not only evaluate everyone's defense, but also their recovery ability. After all, it was inevitable for cultivators to get injured. Therefore, self-recovery was also a very important ability. When all the newcomers arrived, the pavilion master Hu Yunfeng finally arrived. This time, among the crowd that appeared with him, there was an elder in the middle. It was the fourth elder of Blue Cloud Pavilion, Zhao Hongba, who showed his face on the day of the newcomers' guidance. Apart from that, Lin Yi also saw the few law enforcement hall experts that he met a few days ago. Following them were 2 old acquaintances, Su Lingchong and Shangguan Laner. While everyone's attention was on Zhao Hongba and the others, Li Jingming secretly gave Lin Yi a look. Lin Yi smiled knowingly, indicating that he knew what to do. Late last night he received a report from Li Jingming. It listed in detail the plans of Meng Jueguang, Su Lingchong and the others. Therefore, it was not strange for him to see these people from the law enforcement hall today because these people were the important parts of the plan to deal with him. When he thought about how these people led by Su Lingchong had thought of various methods to kill him, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a wave of helplessness, as he wholeheartedly wanted to cultivate properly. This group of fellows really won't let me rest. They're really noisy. However, although he didn't have a good way to get rid of these enemies right now with Lin Yi's various methods, plus Zhong Pingliang and Li Jingming, protecting himself wasn't a problem at all. You have Zhang Liang's stratagem, I have a ladder to climb over the wall. There was still a long way to go, and there would always be a suitable opportunity in the future to kill them in one strike. Hu Yunfeng went up on stage and signaled for the newcomers to quiet down. Then she said in a clear voice, "This is Elder Zhao Hongba. I believe I don't need to introduce him further, right? He has very high attainments in healing injuries. Due to the high risk of danger during the resistance assessment, the Elder Council has specially assigned Elder Zhao to be our special judge for this newcomer assessment. He's in charge of ensuring fairness and impartiality, and if any of you were to suffer a fatal injury during the challenge, he will treat you in time. He will also save you in time. But if that happens, you can forget about getting any points in this round of assessment." After a pause, Hu Yunfeng then pointed to the few law enforcement hall experts and said, "These few you've just met them 3 days ago. They will be our examiners for the resistance assessment. Of course, before that, their strength will be sealed by Elder Zhao to a corresponding level. So, as long as you choose the corresponding strength level, you won't receive attacks that exceed that level. You don't have to worry about this." After hearing this, the group of newcomers clearly heaved a sigh of relief. Judging from their aura, these law enforcement hall experts were obviously existences above the peak of the early stage of Foundation establishment. By letting these people be the examiners, they were afraid that even if they chose the perfect level of Heaven stage, the other party might make a mistake and give them an attack from the early stage of Foundation establishment or even stronger. That would be a huge joke. Fortunately, since these people's strength would be sealed by Zhao Hongba on the spot, there shouldn't be any problems. Furthermore, even if there was a problem, Zhao Hongba would treat them in time. This arrangement was already very thoughtful, and it was unlikely that a fatal accident would occur. Unless they overestimated their own abilities and challenged those of a higher level, then they couldn't blame others if they died. That would really be like the saying, if you don't court death, you won't die. However, it was better not to have such stupid cultivators. However, just as the newcomers heaved a sigh of relief, the corner of Lin Yi's mouth slightly curled up into a sarcastic smile. The information provided by Li Jingming was very clear. Whether it was Zhao Hongba or the law enforcement hall experts, they had actually colluded with Su Lingchong behind the scenes. They were all key links to deal with him. Coupled with people like Meng Jueguang and Meng Tong, it could be said that the entire resistance assessment was a trap arranged by them, just waiting for him to fall into it. What a great show. Lin Yi curled his lips mockingly. He already knew what would happen next like the back of his hand. Before the assessment begins, let me remind you one last time. Although points are important, if you overestimate yourself and end up with a life that you can't enjoy, then you can't blame others, especially those newcomers who like to be in the limelight. Challenging those of a higher level sounds impressive, but unfortunately that's not a hero but a retard. When saying this, Hu Yunfeng looked at Lin Yi in the crowd with a deep meaning. It gave people the feeling that this sentence was specifically targeted at Lin Yi. The surrounding newcomers' gazes focused on Lin Yi. There was much mockery and ridicule in their eyes. Wasn't Lin Yi the kind of newcomer who likes to be in the limelight that Hu Yunfeng mentioned? The so-called fatal trap that is tailored to target one's weakness has already begun? Lin Yi gave a faint smile as he thought nothing of it. Chapter 37:19. These were the exact words that Meng Jueguang had said in the information that Li Jingming had provided, and their subsequent series of plans were all centered around this point. Their goal was to make Lin Yi suffer all sorts of taunts and provocations, and then lose his rationality, and make some decisions that overestimate his own abilities. Only then would they be able to create the perfect opportunity to kill Lin Yi. Hu Yunfeng's nameless taunt was only the first wave. After this, these people would continue to think of ways to provoke Lin Yi, to provoke his pretentious nerves. In all fairness, this plot that Meng Jueguang had planned was actually commendable. If it was anyone else who really liked to show off, if they did not receive information beforehand, if they did not hide their powerful abilities, perhaps there was a 90% chance that they would fall for it. But unfortunately, not only did Lin Yi have the two advantages mentioned above, more importantly, he was not a guy who really liked to show off. With his style, when he really needed to be scared, he would not act rashly and irrationally. Alright, after this, Elder Zhao will seal the abilities of these examiners from the enforcement hall on the spot. All of you prepare yourselves, the test is about to begin. Wu Yunfeng announced at last. All the newcomers immediately gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, making their final preparations, and beside Lin Yi naturally was senior brother Bitter, Xiao Ran, Xiao Hongkai and a few others. At this time, Meng Tong brought a large group of newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion and walked to the front, glancing sideways at Lin Yi, and sneered disdainfully, saying, "Pretentious newcomer, last time because you lost control of the pressure formation, you got lucky and picked up full marks. But this time it's a competition of true abilities, it's not something that can be passed with just a little bit of luck. I'll have to trouble you to ask around. What level are you going to choose?" Lin Yi's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could speak, the rookie beside Meng Tong had already begun mocking impatiently. "Isn't that obvious? You will definitely choose the perfected heaven realm. This fellow only relied on a foundation establishment pill to succeed in foundation establishment. He doesn't have any strength at all. If he were to choose an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, wouldn't he be beaten to death on the spot?" "That's right. Just now, Pavilion Master Hu Yunfeng said that if you challenge someone of a higher rank, you're either a hero or an idiot. But when it comes to us pretentious newbies, those words have to be changed. If you challenge someone of the same rank, you're definitely an idiot. So, it's better to play it safe and choose a Heaven Perfection Realm expert. Why should we choose Heaven Stage Great Perfection? In my opinion, it's better to choose a Heaven Stage Late Stage Peak. If we're not careful, our pretentious newbie and early-stage foundation establishment expert will be killed by a Heaven Stage Great Perfection in one blow. That's why it's better to choose Heaven Rank Late Phase Peak. It'll definitely be easy to pass." The group of newbies who appeared with Meng Tong spoke one after another, mocking and challenging Lin Yi's patience. But no matter what they said, Lin Yi just watched coldly from the sidelines, not moving a muscle. To put it bluntly, the reason why Meng Tong brought these people here was to provoke him. These people did not know about Meng Jueguang's core plan, but as long as he promised them benefits, they would just have to say a few words in front of Lin Yi. It was not a difficult task at all. Naturally, they were happy to cooperate. Moreover, Lin Yi already had a conflict with them during the trials at the back of the mountain. Moreover, Lin Yi had previously obtained a god-level full score that everyone was extremely envious of. They had long disliked Lin Yi. Lin Yi already knew the inside story, so no matter how this group of people mocked and provoked him, he remained indifferent. But the bitter senior beside him could not stand it anymore. The bitter senior could not help but want to come out and reprimand them. No matter what, he was the senior in charge of the Blue Cloud Pavilion newbies. No matter how Meng Jueguang made him a mere figurehead, he still had the authority to reprimand the newbies. Meanwhile, Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongkai were filled with righteous indignation. They even wanted to come out and challenge them to a battle, to teach these ungrateful bastards a lesson. But Lin Yi extended his hand and stopped them. Arguing with these people with ulterior motives was purely a waste of saliva. There was no need. But on the surface, Lin Yi's expression could not help but turn gloomy. Seeing Lin Yi's gloomy face and not saying a word, Meng Tong was secretly delighted. From his point of view, the more Lin Yi held back his words, the more likely he would act tough later. This was because this guy was used to posturing. Later he would definitely choose a higher rank to ruthlessly slap their faces. But before that, he had to give this guy a strong dose of medicine to ensure that nothing went wrong. Meng Tong raised his hand, and the newbies behind him immediately stopped talking. Only then did he say smugly, "Regardless of what rank you, posturing newbie, are planning to choose, I still have to be merciful and inform you. Otherwise, when the points that you obtained with great difficulty are overtaken, it would be too much of a pity if you commit suicide in a moment of helplessness. Let me tell you, I plan to choose the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment." The moment this was said, the surrounding newbies immediately gasped in cooperation. Their surprise was not faked, but it was truly a shock that came from the bottom of their hearts. This was because before this, Meng Tong had never said that he wanted to choose the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. Challenging someone of a higher rank was the behavior of a retard. Pavilion Master Hu Yunfeng's words just now were not said for fun. Don't forget that defense was a weak point for most people. To be able to withstand a full blow from an expert of the same rank was already considered rare. Challenging someone of a higher rank in such an environment was no different from courting death. But Meng Tong had said it so confidently. From his expression, there was no hint of falsehood. He really planned to challenge someone of a higher rank. Hee hee, When the time comes, I'll have a 4th grade Great Recover pill in my mouth, and at the same time get the examiner to secretly go easy on me? This way, I really do have the capital and confidence to challenge a peak of the early stage of Foundation establishment. Lin Yi smiled coldly to himself without batting an eyelid. This point had been specifically mentioned in Li Jingming's information. Originally, for the sake of fairness and impartiality of the assessment, no one was allowed to take any medicinal pills. Otherwise, if they took a near-nature-defying life-saving medicinal pill like the 4th grade Great Recover pill, as long as they could hold on for a moment, they would be guaranteed not to die. Moreover, they would be able to quickly recover from their injuries afterwards. This was practically cheating. If it had been anyone else, Zhao Hongba, the elder judge, would have definitely stepped in to stop them in order to maintain his glorious, upright and positive image. But Meng Tong was a key part of their plan to provoke him. For the sake of Su Lingchong, young Master Su, even Zhao Hongba would only turn a blind eye. Chapter 37:20. Under the respectful and envious gazes of the newcomers, Meng Tong smiled smugly. He looked at Lin Yi disdainfully and said, "As an early-stage Foundation establishment expert, we need to have the dignity of an early-stage Foundation establishment expert. Especially the few of us who succeeded in the Foundation establishment stage first, we need to set an example for others, lest people think that the stronger you are, the less courageous you are. Pretentious newbie, don't you think so? Of course, if you don't have the strength, just pretend I didn't say anything. After all, not every Tom, Dick, or Harry can challenge someone of a higher level." Ah. Without waiting for Lin Yi's response, Meng Tong immediately laughed and turned to leave. His mission had been successfully completed. With Lin Yi's usual pretentious behavior, it would be strange if he did not think of ways to slap their faces after being ridiculed to such an extent. The group of newcomers left with Meng Tong. Qiao Hongkai clenched her fists in righteous indignation and said, "These bastards are too much. Boss Lin Yi, you have to perform well later. Get another god-level full score and slap their faces until they can't take care of themselves anymore. Let's see if they still have the face to say such sarcastic words then." Wrong. Senior brother Ku Bai looked at Lin Yi's gloomy expression and hurriedly advised, "These people are obviously trying to provoke you. Their goal is to force junior brother Lin to challenge someone of a higher level. Once you really do that, you will fall into their trap. Junior brother Lin, you have to think twice. This is not something to be trifled with." Xiao Ran also reminded, "Indeed, this group of people is too deliberate. There's definitely something fishy going on when things are abnormal. Boss Lin Yi, you can't be impulsive." After listening to the two of them, Xiao Hongkai finally realized the mystery behind it. She said with lingering fear, "Damn, that's too sinister. How can Meng Tong have such a brain? It must be Meng Jueguang playing tricks behind the scenes. I was just spouting nonsense just now. Boss Lin Yi, don't take it to heart. After all, safety first." With Meng Tong's strength, he dared to choose the peak of the early stage of Foundation establishment? That's bullshit. He's definitely trying to deceive Boss Lin Yi, that's why he said that on purpose. Looking at the three people's anxious expressions, Yi Zichen felt a chill run down his spine. Lin Yi smiled and said, "You guys can rest assured. Do I look like such a brainless person? Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." The three of them looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that Lin Yi was still as calm as ever. To be honest, they were really afraid that Lin Yi would be stimulated to the point of losing his mind. Not to be outdone, he would also choose a peak early-stage Foundation establishment cultivator. That would be really troublesome. After all, the resistance test this time was not the same as the suppression test last time. During the suppression test, one could still observe one's state and decide at any time whether to leave the field or not. But this time the resistance test was different. Once the level was chosen in advance, there was no chance to change it. If one rashly chose to challenge a higher level because of a moment of impulse, the final result was likely to be directly killed by the examiner in one move. At that time, even if Elder Zhao Hongba was present, he wouldn't be able to find a chance to save him. While they were talking, Zhao Hongba had already finished sealing the strength of the few law enforcement hall experts. Peak late stage heaven stage, great perfection heaven stage, early stage foundation establishment, early stage foundation establishment, and early stage foundation establishment each had an examiner. Since most of the newcomers were great perfection heaven stage experts, there were 2 extra examiners for great perfection heaven stage experts, and they could take turns. The second round of the newcomer assessment, the resistance test, officially began. What was somewhat unexpected was that the order of the assessment this time was not according to the usual tradition of Soaring Sky Pavilion leading the way and Blue Cloud Pavilion at the end. Instead, it was the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion who took the lead. Lin Yi secretly smiled. This time, in order to target him, Su Lingchong and the others really spent a lot of effort. They even paid attention to such a small detail. The reason was very simple. Even if there was the provocation of Meng Tong and the others in advance, even if Lin Yi temporarily lost his reason, if there was a long time in between, it was inevitable that he would calm down. In a situation where he didn't have enough confidence, it was very likely that he would give up on challenging a higher level. But the order of the assessment now was that the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion would take the lead. This way there wouldn't be any time left for Lin Yi to react, and the success of the plan could be guaranteed. Seeing that Zhao Hongba and the examiners from the law enforcement hall were ready, Hu Yunfeng announced to the newcomers in a clear voice, "Next, the second round of the assessment will officially begin. Starting from the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion, the two steward seniors will first organize everyone to register, and then according to the strength of each person who registered, the assessment will start from weak to strong. As the newcomer deacon, Junior Kong will be in charge of recording." After Hu Yunfeng finished speaking, Meng Jueguang intentionally sneered and glanced at Lin Yi. However, he didn't directly let Lin Yi register first. Instead, he walked to Meng Tong's side and indicated that he should start with him. Meng Tong immediately raised his head and puffed out his chest, proudly saying in a loud voice, "Meng Tong, early stage of foundation establishment, challenge the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment." As soon as these words were spoken, the entire crowd was in an uproar. At this moment, the newcomers from the other two pavilions who didn't know beforehand looked at Meng Tong with disbelief. Don't forget that pavilion head Hu Yunfeng had specifically emphasized that everyone shouldn't choose to challenge someone of a higher level just to be a hero. That was an incurably stupid behavior. However, the first person to register, Meng Tong, actually chose to challenge someone of a higher level. Moreover, it was the most difficult of all, the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. This really made everyone's jaws drop. One must know that there was a common understanding in the cultivation world. When it came to challenging someone of a higher level, the higher one's strength was, the more difficult it would be. If it was said that low-level cultivators could still challenge someone of a higher level, then when it came to the early stage of foundation establishment and above, this kind of situation was extremely rare. This was because at a low level the difference in strength was still only 1 or 2. Using a little bit of other trump cards was enough to make up for this little bit of difference. The difficulty of challenging someone of a higher level was not too high. However, when it came to the early stage of foundation establishment and above, the difference in strength became 10,000 and 20,000. The difference was not something that could be made up for with ordinary trump cards. If one wanted to challenge someone of a higher level, the possibility of success was basically negligible. What's more, this was a test of resistance. Wanting to challenge someone of a higher level in defense, which was the weakness of most people in the eyes of ordinary people, was no different from courting death. However, looking at Meng Tong's expression that was full of confidence, the newcomers found it hard to believe. However, they didn't dare to rashly mock him, for fear that they would be slapped in the face when the time came. Chapter 37:21. Could it be that this guy was a defense-type expert? The newcomers couldn't help but look at each other. No matter what, Meng Tong was a big brother-level figure among this batch of newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion. The newcomers from the other two pavilions more or less had some understanding of him. However, rumor had it that this guy cultivated the 1,000 kicks technique, which had absolutely nothing to do with defense. If he was originally an expert that focused on defense, it would be easier to understand why he would take the risk to challenge someone of a higher level. After all, even someone of a higher level wouldn't be killed in one move. At most, they would be heavily injured. However, this guy, Meng Tong, was clearly not one of them. Not only did the newcomers from the other two pavilions look at each other, even the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion who already knew about it were shocked. When they heard Meng Tong's proud proclamation, they all thought he was just saying it to provoke Lin Yi. Who would have thought that this guy actually planned to do it? An expert that had just broken through to the early stage of foundation establishment actually wanted to challenge a peak early stage foundation establishment's full power attack. Just thinking about it made their blood boil. Is this guy crazy? He actually wants to challenge a peak early stage foundation establishment? Could it be that he bribed the examiner? Qiao Hongkai was dumbfounded and couldn't help but question in a low voice. If he relied purely on strength, based on how weak Meng Tong was when he was defeated by Lin Yi in one move on the first day, challenging a peak early-stage foundation establishment was simply courting death. Other than bribing the examiner to cheat, Xiao Hongkai really couldn't think of any other reasonable explanation. Although the bitter senior brother also found it hard to believe, he shook his head and said, "That's impossible." The examiner's strength was sealed by Elder Zhao in front of him. This kind of seal doesn't only seal the upper limit of strength, but also the lower limit of strength. In other words, if Meng Tong signed up for a peak early-stage foundation establishment, it would be impossible for the examiner to go easy on him. That's because any one of his moves would have the strength of a peak early-stage foundation establishment. If Meng Tong doesn't have a strong defense, it would be useless even if he bribed the examiner. In that case, could it be that Meng Tong really has such strength? Xiao Ran was aghast when he heard that. No matter how he looked at it, Meng Tong didn't look like a guy with this kind of super strength. Boss Lin Yi was more like it, but if he really had to report a peak early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, he was afraid that when the time came it would be difficult. It doesn't matter if he has the strength or not. Since Meng Tong dared to say this in front of everyone, he must be prepared. Lin Yi's lips curled into a playful smile. There was indeed nothing wrong with what senior brother Wuxia had just said. However, he had neglected one point. Although Zhao Hongba was the high and mighty fourth elder of Blue Cloud Pavilion, he was not the only one. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to talk to him at all, and it was even more impossible for him to cooperate with any tricks. But don't forget, Su Lingchong, the eldest young master Su, was still standing there. Other people were merely ants in Zhao Hongba's eyes and didn't have the qualifications to talk to him. But this eldest young master Su was Su Yuanjing's most valued grandson. In a sense, he represented Su Yuanjing himself. If eldest young master Su opened his mouth to ask for a favor from him, as long as it wasn't too excessive, that elder Zhao would definitely agree to it. And this time, Su Lingchong's request just happened to be within the scope of his authority. It was just a matter of lifting a hand. Su Lingchong's request was very simple. As long as Zhao Hongba sealed the strength of these law enforcement hall experts, he would leave a bit of leeway in the sealing process for the examiners representing the early stage and early stage foundation establishment cultivators. Originally, according to the normal sealing, the strength of each examiner had already been locked. Once they were sealed to the corresponding level, then the power of their moves would definitely be fixed. There wouldn't be any fluctuations. In other words, if the newcomers chose the same level, then the power of the attacks they received would be strictly the same. Only in this way could the fairness of the assessment be maximized. However, Zhao Hongba, who had been instructed by Su Lingchong, had left some room for the examiners at the beginning and peak stage of the foundation establishment realm to fluctuate their power during the sealing process. Although the difference in power was not too big, as long as they wanted to, they could fluctuate their power by 30% or lower it by 30%. In this way they could go easy on Meng Tong during the process and not accidentally kill him with one blow. They could also guarantee that Lin Yi would die. Think about it, if Lin Yi chose the early stage foundation establishment cultivator, in everyone's understanding, it would already be extremely difficult for him to challenge someone of a higher level. If he increased the power by 30% on top of that, it would definitely be difficult for him to not die. There would be no chance of survival. And the reason why he had the examiners of the early stage foundation establishment cultivator tamper with it was nothing more than a backup plan. Although Meng Jueguang's plan this time had a 90% chance of forcing Lin Yi to choose the early stage foundation establishment cultivator, there was still a chance of failure after all. With this backup plan, even if Lin Yi admitted defeat and chose the early stage foundation establishment cultivator, the examiners would still give him a vicious blow with all their might. That would definitely be too much for him. Even if he was lucky enough not to die, he would have to lie in bed for at least half a month to recover from his heavy injuries. Just as Li Jingming had said, this time in order to deal with Lin Yi, Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang had already racked their brains to ensure that nothing went wrong and eliminate Lin Yi, this thorn in their side. Looking at everyone's shocked reactions, Meng Jueguang smiled playfully. After all, Lin Yi was not an ordinary character and would not be so easy to deal with. If Meng Tong had only made a feint instead of being the first to sign up, how could this guy be fooled? After Meng Tong signed up, Meng Jueguang did not let Li Jingming, who was standing beside him, be the second to sign up. Instead, he directly walked in front of Lin Yi. Everyone's gazes then focused on Lin Yi, each and every one of them carrying playful and expectant expressions. Meng Jueguang curled his lips with a hint of disdain and said, "Junior brother Lin Yi, if I remember correctly, you are the first newcomer to successfully build your foundation in our welcome pavilion. You also got full marks in the last assessment. I wonder what level you're planning to choose this time? It won't be lower than Meng Tong's, right? Of course, this is understandable. It's human nature to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. It doesn't matter if you're a little cowardly. It's just a little gossip, that's all. It's better than losing your life, don't you think? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Meng Jueguang's words obviously had ulterior motives and was trying to provoke Lin Yi into falling for his trick. The bitter senior brother beside him hurriedly gave Lin Yi a look, indicating that he must remain calm and not fall for Meng Jueguang's tricks. Chapter 37-22. However, Lin Yi was their boss. How could he fall for such an obvious trap? However, what Lin Yi said next shocked everyone. Lin Yi, early stage of the foundational level, challenging the peak of the foundational level. What? The peak of the foundational level? Senior brother Ku Xiaoran and Xiao Hongkai were shocked. They looked at each other. Lin Yi actually fell for such an obvious trap? Not only them, but even Li Jingming couldn't hide the shock on his face. Before this, the others might have thought that Lin Yi would fall for the trap, but he was the only one who wouldn't. This was because he had sent information to Lin Yi last night, revealing the plan of Meng Jueguang and the others in detail. This was to prevent Lin Yi from being caught off guard and falling for the trap. Even if it was any other ordinary person after knowing the other party's plot, they definitely wouldn't fall for it, right? However, Lin Yi was a dragon among men. After receiving the information, he actually chose the peak of the foundational level as the other party wished. What kind of situation was this? Li Jingming looked at Lin Yi in disbelief. He was confused and didn't know what was going on. Even if Lin Yi's strength had reached the peak of the foundational level, it was obvious that this time, it was to trick Lin Yi. The other party would activate an attack that was 30% stronger than the peak of the foundational level. Would Lin Yi be able to withstand it? Of course, Lin Yi had the space in the Jade Pendant and the art of dragon mastery. As long as he was hanging on for a moment, he would be able to recover. Therefore, even if he chose the middle of the foundational level, Lin Yi would be able to withstand it. However, Lin Yi didn't want to be too shocking. Moreover, Lin Yi had to be careful. If he chose the middle of the foundational level, Meng Jueguang and the others would be crazy enough to increase the examiner's strength by 30%. Lin Yi was afraid that he would be killed in one move. Little brother Lin Yi, don't tell me he's really going to do something stupid? Shengguan Lan who was standing far away with the little curly bear in her arms, covered her mouth in surprise. Although she didn't know all the details. But in order to save face in front of her, Su Lingchong had more or less revealed some information when he invited her over. It seemed that the most important part was to provoke Lin Yi into making a decision that overestimated himself. In this way, wouldn't he fall right into this group of people's trap? And at the same time that they were shocked and anxious, Su Lingchong and the other fellows who schemed to deal with Lin Yi all smiled knowingly. In their hearts, they praised Meng Jueguang for being an experienced schemer. Although Lin Yi was a little difficult to deal with, he was still a little too inexperienced to play mind games with him. Meng Jueguang. Very good. You've got guts. Meng Jueguang gave Huang Xiaolong a big thumbs up, a mocking smile on his face as he said, I hope junior brother Lin Yi won't become one of those idiots that Lord Pavilion Lord described. Otherwise, it would be a pity if our Clear Cloud Pavilion managed to cultivate such a talented disciple like you. Meng Jueguang laughed loudly and turned to leave, letting the other Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomers continue to sign up. Senior brother Ku Bai and the others hurriedly surrounded Lin Yi and said worriedly, Junior brother Lin, you're too rash. How could you fall for such an obvious trap? This kind of assessment will definitely not be lenient. At that time, even if they kill you in one move, they won't have to bear any responsibility. Even if you die, it would be in vain. However, Lin Yi's expression was indifferent from beginning to end. He didn't have the slightest hint of regret. Senior brother Ku Bai couldn't help but become anxious. Junior brother Lin, although you're now in the early stage of foundation establishment and it seems like there's only a fine line between you and the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment, the difference between the two is actually like heaven and earth. It's not that easy to challenge someone of a higher level. Why don't I go and tell Pavilion Master Hu to directly give up this round of assessment? Even if you don't get any points, it's still better than losing your life. I'm not joking with you. In order to protect him, this senior brother Ku Bai really spared no effort. Lin Yi was moved. He glanced at Laner in the distance, who seemed to want to say something but was hesitant to do so. If he really gave up halfway like senior brother Ku Bai said, although it was somewhat against the rules, this little senior sister would definitely come forward to help, and he could escape this disaster. However, it was just a full blow from a peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. Others might not dare to imagine it, but did he need to be afraid? Not to mention that he had hidden the strength of the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. Even if the opponent's attack was 30% more powerful, it would still be impossible to kill him in one move. Moreover, with the space of the Jade Pendant to quickly replenish his true chi and the self-healing effect of the Art of Dragon Mastery, no matter how serious the injury was, it would be fleeting. Lin Yi immediately gave Laner a reassuring look. At the same time, he smiled and patted Senior Brother Ku Bai on the shoulder. Senior Brother Ku, don't get too excited. This time I really didn't do it on impulse. I really have the confidence to deal with it. You can rest assured. Really? Even though Lin Yi said so, Senior Brother Ku Bai still couldn't believe it. Even Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongkai looked at each other. Although Lin Yi always surprised people, this kind of thing was still beyond their understanding. An early stage of foundation establishment master challenging a full blow from a peak of the early stage of foundation establishment was really not something an ordinary person could do. It's more real than real gold. You guys just wait and see. Lin Yi nodded affirmatively. This time, Senior Brother Ku Bai, Xiao Ran and Xiao Hongkai were both speechless. Since Lin Yi had said so, it was useless for them to say anything more. They could only let him be. After a while, all the newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion had finished registering. Of the 15 newcomers, 3 chose the peak of the late stage of Heaven stage, 10 chose the great perfection of Heaven stage, and the remaining 2, Meng Tong and Lin Yi, chose the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. Apart from Meng Tong and Lin Yi, the other newcomers in Blue Cloud Pavilion chose to be relatively conservative. None of them chose to challenge someone of a higher level. After all, the great perfection of Heaven stage and the early stage of foundation establishment were 2 completely different levels. The gap between them was even bigger than that between the early stage and the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. They were not fools, so naturally they would not make such a stupid choice. Among the crowd, there were even 3 people who chose to challenge someone of a lower level. Although this kind of behavior seemed a little cowardly, for those who really knew their limits, it could be regarded as a wise choice. Just like what Hu Yunfeng said, challenging someone of a higher level was stupid. If one didn't have the strength, even if they braced themselves and chose to challenge someone of the same level, they would still be stupid. When the time came, the ones who would suffer the most serious injuries and die the most miserably were often these people who didn't know their limits. Especially someone who saw someone else choose the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment and also made the same choice. He was definitely the dumbest of the dumbest. Chapter 37-23. Su Lingchong and the others curled their lips at the same time. The title of acting cool newcomer was indeed not in vain. This fellow really knew how to act cool. He was obviously about to die, yet he was still able to pretend to be calm and collected. It was infuriating. But this was also good. The more he pretended now, the more miserable his death would be. That would be even more satisfying. After all the newbies in the Blue Cloud Pavilion had registered, the second round of the resistance assessment began. According to the instructions, it started from the lowest peak late stage of Heaven stage. Under the mocking and playful gazes of all the newbies, the 3 newbies who admitted defeat went up the stage one after another. Although they appeared to be rather embarrassed and panicked, they were still experts at Heaven stage full circle. Even if they didn't know any defensive martial skills, the strength of the true chi in their bodies was more than enough to deal with attacks of a lower level. Soon the 3 of them finished the assessment. The process was uneventful. Although each of them was more or less injured, the injuries were obviously not serious. They should be able to recover within an hour. In other words, the 3 of them should be able to get 5 strength points and 5 recovery points. The total points for the second round would be 10 points. Although it was barely enough for the other strength points, it was already a gain to be able to pass this round without any mishap. If they had chosen to attack with the full strength of a Heaven stage great perfection expert, they might have already become corpses lying on the ground. What was the point of getting more points? In the end, people still had to know their limits and know how to be content. Only then could they live long. After the peak late stage of Heaven stage, it was the turn of the Heaven stage great perfection experts. There were a total of 10 people. If it wasn't for the foresight of Pavilion Master Hu Yunfeng to prepare 3 examiners to take turns, they would probably be half dead from exhaustion. The assessment process would also be greatly delayed. Compared to the previous 3 people who were uneventful, now that it was the turn of the Heaven stage great perfection experts, there were obviously twists and turns. After all, even when facing a full strength attack of the same level, if one's defense was weak, it was very easy to be in danger. Not only could it be seriously injured, it could even be fatal. The truth was indeed as everyone expected. The first guy to go up was directly hit by the examiner's palm and was seriously injured. Looking at his pale face, it was already very lucky that he didn't die. He probably wouldn't recover for the next 10 days to half a month. In other words, barring any major accidents, his recovery points would be 0. Including the 10 strength points, this guy's total score was exactly the same as the previous 3. However, the other party was more sensible, so he only suffered some minor injuries while this guy was more miserable. Not to mention that he would have to recuperate for more than 10 days, it might even affect the next round of the assessment. The gains simply did not make up for the losses. As expected, it was important to know one's limits. Looking at this guy's miserable state, the 3 people who had been ridiculed earlier immediately felt great. As for the other fellows who were about to take the test, after seeing this scene, they couldn't help but feel nervous. After all, the strength of these people was not much stronger than this unlucky fellow. However, the registration had already been announced in advance, and there was no room for regret. At this time, no matter how scared they were, they could only brace themselves and go. Among the next 9 people, 2 were heavily injured, 4 were moderately injured, and only 3 were lightly injured. From the looks of it, they would be able to recover within an hour and obtain the full recovery points. And these 3 people were directly related to Lin Yi. One was Xiao Ran, the other was Qiao Hongkai. The last one was Li Jingming. Among the 3, Lin Yi initially thought that Xiao Ran's strength was the strongest. After all, he came up from the secular world together with him, so he knew him inside out. Moreover, this person was introverted and calm, belonging to the type who had accumulated a lot of experience. In terms of defense, he wasn't weak either, so it was easy for him to deal with this kind of assessment. In reality, Xiao Ran's performance from the beginning to the end was calm and collected. In comparison, although Qiao Hongkai was also lightly injured, she looked slightly disheveled. However, what Lin Yi didn't expect was that Li Jingming's performance was even more relaxed than Xiao Ran's. When faced with the examiner's full-force attack, a layer of frost instantly formed on Li Jingming's chest, helping him block a lot of damage. Therefore, in the short time it took for him to leave the stage, this fellow had already stood up. After Zhao Hongba checked on him, he announced that his injuries were completely healed. Thinking back to how Li Jingming had deliberately concealed his strength and kept a low profile, Lin Yi believed that this fellow must have held back just now. If he had used his full strength, it was very likely that he wouldn't have been injured at all. One could imagine that this fellow was also a truly strong person. If not for the fact that his strength was 2 whole levels higher than his opponent's, Lin Yi felt that he might not have been able to subdue this fellow. He might even have had to be wary of him. But now, since Li Jingming had become his spy, it was naturally better for him to be stronger. With the completion of the Sky Class exam completed, the focus of the audience was naturally on Meng Tong and Lin Yi. All of their expressions were complicated, with respect, envy, mockery, playfulness, and all sorts of other hidden meanings. As the only 4 early-stage Foundation establishment masters among all the newcomers of the 3 great pavilions, and with Kang Ming and Zhong Pingliang not registering yet, Meng Tong and Lin Yi were very likely to be the only 2 newcomers to challenge the peak early-stage Foundation establishment. This kind of challenge could only be encountered by chance, and everyone naturally had to open their eyes wide to see it clearly. The examiner was ready. Under everyone's gaze, Meng Tong glanced at Lin Yi, his face full of disdain. Pretentious newbie, you or me? Whatever. Lin Yi shrugged indifferently. I can tell that you're not confident just by looking at you. I'll be merciful and take the lead. I'll let you know what a true early-stage Foundation establishment master is. You're just a guy who relied on the Foundation establishment pill and bullshit luck to barely succeed. You're not good enough. Meng Tong laughed coldly, then walked towards the examiner. This was their plan. If Meng Tong didn't take the lead and take the exam, Lin Yi might go back on his word when the time came. But if Meng Tong took the initiative to take the front, Lin Yi would definitely be numb after seeing Meng Tong successfully take the full blow of the early-stage Foundation establishment master. He would think that if Meng Tong, who had always been inferior to him, could do it, then he could do it as well. Only then would he be willing to step into the abyss of death. Chapter 37-24. He had clearly seen Meng Tong secretly consume a medicinal pill before the other people's attention was diverted. Needless to say, it was the Grade 4 Great Recovery pill mentioned in Li Jingming's report. As long as it wasn't a direct death blow, as long as a Foundation establishment expert still had one last breath, He could rely on the heaven-defying effect of this grade 4 Great Recovery pill to snatch the person back from the hands of the Grim Reaper and quickly recover his vitality. If it was used on an ordinary person, as long as they weren't too weak, no matter how serious the injury was, they could recover in an instant. Perhaps a moment ago they were on the verge of death, but after consuming it, they would immediately be full of vigor and vitality. But if it was used on an early foundation establishment expert like Meng Tong, because the vitality he needed to replenish was far above that of an ordinary person, the effect wouldn't be so abnormal, but he would definitely be able to recover within a day. It was said that this grade 4 Great Recovery pill was personally provided by Su Lingchong. This time, in order to deal with him, this young Master Su really put in a lot of capital. However, although he saw Meng Tong violate the rules and consume the medicinal pill in advance, Lin Yi didn't plan to expose him in public. Because if he did, this grade 4 Great Recovery pill would instantly be eaten by Meng Tong, and there would be no evidence. Moreover, the only person present who had the qualifications to check whether Meng Tong consumed the pill in advance, Elder Zhao Hongba, would definitely not stand on his side. So, instead of exposing him in public and asking for trouble, he might as well observe the situation from the sidelines. Later he would give this group of scheming fellows a big surprise. Under the gaze of everyone present, Meng Tong walked in front of the examiner with an air of arrogance. Everyone couldn't help but secretly spit, a villain intoxicated by success. When he stood 10 feet in front of them, the examiner nodded to Zhao Hongba and Hu Yunfeng, and quietly exchanged a look with Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang and the others. Only then did he signal the start of the test. Next is the Peak Early Foundation Establishment Level Test. Are you ready? The examiner confirmed for the last time. That's right. Come on. Meng Tong didn't even raise his eyelids, and had the demeanor of a peerless expert who viewed the examiner as grass. Fuck. If it wasn't for young Master Su telling me to go easy on you, I would have beaten you to death with one slap just because of your infuriating behavior. This guy obviously needed to cheat to muddle his way through, but he still wanted to put on a disdainful attitude. This guy clearly needed to cheat to get through, but he still wanted to put on a disdainful attitude. However, no matter how much he disliked Meng Tong for the sake of Su Lingchong's grand plan, this examiner could only pinch his nose and endure. Not only could he not kill the opponent with one slap, but he also had to hold on. Otherwise, with Meng Tong's meager strength, if he were to really strike him with the full strength of a peak initial stage foundation establishment cultivator, there was a 90% chance that he would be killed in a single strike. Even if he had prepared a 4th grade great cyclic pill in his mouth in advance, he still wouldn't have the chance to swallow it. Great s to Meng tu a ching to say said to say tong great zhou if he and to say chi he is to wan to defend against the examiner's attack. This was a choice that he had no other choice. Although it could not be compared to those specialized defensive martial skills, it was still somewhat effective. Especially for an expert in the early stage of foundation establishment like him, the true chi in his body had already reached a certain level, and just relying on true chi was enough to offset the full power attack of a heaven stage paragon. But now he was facing a foundation establishment level attack. The damage that his chi could defend against was obviously not enough. But it was better than nothing, and it was better than doing nothing. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the examiner to make his move. After all, it was not easy to see the power of a foundation establishment level expert in the welcome pavilion. And the examiner didn't disappoint. Without any preparation, he struck out with a seemingly ordinary palm, slowly but quickly. By the time it reached Meng Tong's chest, it was already carrying the force of a thunderbolt. There were so many heaven stage great perfection experts here. Just looking at it was enough to make one's heart jump. Although this palm was only a regular attack from a foundation establishment level expert, and it didn't carry any powerful effects, its power was still not something that they, who hadn't even reached the foundation establishment level, could defend against. Just looking at it from the side was enough to make one's heart tremble. If they were in Meng Tong's position, they would definitely die. No matter how powerful the pill was, it wouldn't be able to save their lives. Bang! The palm hit and Meng Tong let out a muffled groan. Then he flew out like a kite with a broken string, falling for more than 10 feet. Looking at his condition, he was no longer as arrogant as before. His face was pale as paper and he couldn't stop vomiting blood. Fortunately, he had consumed a grade 4 great revitalizing pill just now. Otherwise he would have died. However, even though the 4th stage great recovery pill had already begun to display its heaven-defying effects in his body, Meng Tong still couldn't stop his vision from turning black. He held on to his last breath to prevent himself from collapsing. His internal organs felt unbearable, as if they had shifted positions. This kind of feeling was worse than death. Fortunately, he had the 4th stage Great Recovery pill to prolong his life, so there was no danger to his life. Although Meng Tong was in a dispirited state, he was still able to grit his teeth and force himself to sit up. He began to meditate to heal his internal injuries. The eyes of the surrounding newcomers were obviously filled with shock and awe. Let's not talk about how long it would take for this guy to recover. The fact that he was able to withstand the attack and not die was already a miraculous performance. There was no need to doubt his strength. After all, these surrounding newcomers didn't know that Meng Tong had consumed a 4th stage Great Recovery pill. They thought that it was all because of Meng Tong's own foundation establishment level strength. This kind of performance was naturally strong. After sending Meng Tong flying, the examiner looked at Lin Yi from afar with a playful expression. It's your turn now, right? Previously, in order to kill Lin Yi, these few law enforcement hall experts went for wool and came home shorn. Because the pressure formation had mysteriously gone out of control, they had instead suffered serious injuries. They had lost all face in front of Su Lingchong, eldest young Master Su. Naturally, they hated Lin Yi because of this. Now it was finally time for revenge. This brat was merely an expert in the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. There was no way he would be able to survive the full force attack of a peak early stage Foundation establishment realm expert. He could only wait to die. Sensing the fierce killing intent hidden in the examiner's eyes, Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. Chapter 37-25. However, regardless of whether it was in the mortal world or on this heavenly island, there were always enemies everywhere. Lin Yi was already used to it and didn't care about the few of them. In the end, it was still uncertain who would step on who. Under everyone's gaze, Lin Yi gave Senior Ku Bai and the others a look to reassure them. Then he slowly walked in front of the examiner and stood 10 feet away from him. He wasn't as arrogant as Meng Tong just now. Instead, he was calm and collected with the demeanor of an expert. The examiner couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. Previously, when he saw this kid's calm and composed expression, he could still think that he was putting on a brave front. But now that he was about to die, he was still able to maintain this pretentious demeanor, and not even the slightest trace of nervousness could be seen on his face. Could it be that he saw that even Meng Tong could hold on, so this kid thought that he would be able to pass easily? That's why he was so unscrupulous? The examiner secretly laughed. This kid was an expert in the early stages of the foundational level, yet he didn't even have this much self-awareness. Furthermore, he couldn't sense the danger at all. If he died later, he really couldn't blame anyone but himself for being stupid. A sin caused by the heavens could be forgiven, but a sin caused by oneself couldn't be avoided. This kid was so stupid that even the heavens wouldn't help him. When Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang and the others saw this scene, they immediately looked at each other and smiled as if their plot had succeeded. The deadly trap that they had deliberately set up was finally about to enter the final stage. At this point, even if Lin Yi sensed that something was wrong, it was already too late for him to turn back. He could only brace himself and carry on. Then what awaited him was a tragic death. There was no other possibility. Woo 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 woo. The suffocating atmosphere made the little curly bear in Laner's arms instinctively restless. It couldn't help but whimper at Lin Yi. As a spiritual beast, even if it was still in its infancy, the little curly bear's ability to sense danger was far above that of a normal person. It could clearly feel the danger that made it instinctively feel fear. At this moment, it was shrouding the top of Lin Yi's head. Little Bai, be quiet. Shanghai Laner frowned slightly. Because Su Lingchong had previously revealed part of the plan to her, although she did not know the specific details, she still felt that something was wrong with the current situation. It seemed that Lin Yi had completely fallen into the other party's trap and was in a rather bad situation. However, even if she wanted to step forward to help Lin Yi at this time. However, he still had to worry about his previous agreement with Lin Yi. In front of others, he had to pretend that he hated Lin Yi. Otherwise, not only would he not be able to help Lin Yi, he might even bring him more trouble. Although Shangguan Laner was not a scheming person and gave people a feeling of naivety. However, this did not mean that she was stupid. On the contrary, when she really wanted to think about something, she was much smarter than most people. Since Lin Yi asked her to cooperate and act in front of others, she could guess that there must be a deeper meaning behind it, even though he didn't specify what it was for. Analyzing the reason. Most of it was to numb some people. If these people saw that she had a close relationship with Lin Yi because of her special identity, it would easily bring trouble to Lin Yi, a grassroots newcomer from the secular world. It might even be a big trouble like getting himself killed. Therefore, in front of outsiders she must keep a distance from Lin Yi. This was a kind of disguised protection for Lin Yi. And if she stepped forward to stop it now, not to mention whether she could really help Lin Yi, at least this layer of disguised protection would naturally be broken. This was not a good thing for Lin Yi. Therefore, even if she knew that Lin Yi's current situation was not good, after struggling for a long time, Shanghai Laner did not step forward to stop it. It was not until Lin Yi quietly gave her a reassuring look that the big stone in her heart finally fell to the ground. This little junior brother Lin Yi. As expected, he had the confidence to deal with this crisis. Although she knew that this kind of challenge was extremely difficult, although she had only met Lin Yi a few times, and was not clear about how much confidence Lin Yi had, but Shanghai Laner instinctively chose to believe in Lin Yi. She believed that her little junior brother would definitely be able to pass this challenge easily. Please? Lin Yi raised his hand slightly, indicating that the examiner could begin at any time. Pretentious. The examiner curled his lips in disdain, then quickly mobilized the chi in his body and gathered it on his palm. Very quickly, it reached the upper limit of the seal. But this was not the end. Even if he had already reached the upper limit of the seal, he could still continue to mobilize the remaining chi through the gap in the seal. It was just that it was more difficult to mobilize and the amount was limited. After accumulating his chi for a while, the chi gathered on the examiner's palm finally reached its limit. Impressively, it had already far exceeded the level of a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert, exceeding by more than 30%. This time it was different from when he was facing Meng Tong. The palm that sent Meng Tong flying did not have any frightening aspects at the beginning. It was only at the moment when it hit Meng Tong did it explode with a thunderous power. But this time, even if the examiner had not made his move, just by condensing the chi, everyone present had already started to feel fear. It was as if a storm was coming, and the pressure was so great that they could not breathe. Why did it feel like this palm was much stronger than the one he had used against Meng Tong? Everyone could not help but feel a trace of doubt in their hearts. But because they were experts at the peak of heaven stage, they did not have a deep understanding of the peak early stage foundation establishment, so they treated this thought as an illusion. Because Pavilion Head Hu Yunfeng had said very clearly that every examiner's strength was fixed by the seal. For attacks of the same level, it was impossible for one palm to be lighter than the other, so this strange thought must be an illusion. But how could this be an illusion? The palm that Meng Tong faced just now only had 70% of the power of a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, but the palm that Lin Yi faced now had 130% of the power of a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, almost twice the power of the previous one. Naturally, the power could not be mentioned in the same breath. Oh no, junior brother Lin has fallen into a trap. The bitter senior brother's heart instantly tightened. He was different from these newcomers. It was normal for newcomers to not understand the strength of a peak early stage foundation establishment expert, but how could he not understand? Chapter 37-26. Furthermore, he had been in the three pavilions for quite some time now and had seen plenty of early-stage foundation establishment cultivators. However, it was already too late for Ku Bai Shixiang to realize that something was amiss, because the examiner was already smiling viciously at Lin Yi, unleashing a strike that was far beyond the peak of the early phase of foundation building. Die in peace, pretentious newbie. Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang, and the rest smiled gleefully at the same time. Lin Yi was a newbie from the secular world. Although he had performed miraculous feats, he had overestimated himself and could only stop here. Even though they were enemies, they had to admit that Lin Yi was indeed a genius. In the future he might become a huge problem for them. Unfortunately, the world of cultivation was never short of geniuses. The feeling of killing a genius with one hand was truly wonderful. However, in the next moment, the smiles on their faces froze. Bang! The examiner's palm landed on Lin Yi's chest with twice the force from before. He had thought that Lin Yi would be sent flying further than Meng Tong and fall more miserably. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, Lin Yi merely grunted and took a step back. That was all. At the same time, just as the examiner's momentum was about to reach its limit, he suddenly felt a strong wave of vital energy bite him. He grunted and took a step back as well. This was Lin Yi using the rich vital energy in his body to passively defend and attack. This was also known as an offensive defense. Compared to purely passive vital energy defense, this method could greatly reduce the damage. Although the effect was not as good as a defensive technique, if one was skilled enough, it would not be too far off. This was a method that Linny had come up with on a whim. He never thought that it would actually work. In an instant, everyone present, including Elder Zhao Hongba, Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang, were all dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? This kind of scene gave people the feeling that two experts of the same level were facing off head-on. Therefore both of them took a step back. But the problem was, how was this a head-on clash between two experts of the same level? It was only the examiner who had slapped Linny once. An all-out attack that exceeded the might of the peak of the early stage of Foundation establishment by 30% landed on an expert of the early stage of Foundation establishment. Not only did it not kill the other party, but it instead forced the other party to take a step back. This doesn't make sense. Thank you for your guidance. Not only did Lin Yi not die from having his tendons and meridians shattered as everyone had hoped, he even spoke without a change in his expression. Only then did he let out a long breath of turbid air and sat down on the ground to begin recovering from his injuries. Holy shit. The examiner looked at Lin Yi in disbelief, then turned his head to look at Su Lingchong and the rest, who were similarly dumbfounded. Everyone had an expression as if they had seen a ghost. His mouth was so wide open that it could fit a basket of eggs. Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang looked at each other dumbfoundedly and saw that this fellow's old face was flushed red. Flustered and exasperated, he said, "That's impossible. That's impossible. This kid must have already suffered a fatal internal injury. All the tendons and meridians in his chest have been shattered. He's just hanging on with his last breath." He had planned in every possible way beforehand. Moreover, he had gotten young Master Su to step forward and clear up all the joints. He had even given a 4th-grade great rejuvenating pill as his capital. With such a perfect plan, Meng Jueguang simply did not believe that there was a possibility of failure. If it was said that Lin Yi had shrunk back in advance and given up on the points for this match, although it was regrettable, at least it was more understandable. But the situation before their eyes was completely incomprehensible. He was clearly an early-stage Foundation establishment expert. He had clearly suffered a fatal palm strike with 130% of the peak of the early-stage Foundation establishment's power, yet he still looked as if nothing had happened. Was this possible? Based on this fellow's usual pretentious behavior, it's not impossible for him to continue pretentiously until he dies. It's very possible that he'll just die sitting there. Su Lingchong was similarly unwilling to believe that such a perfect plan would have such an outcome. Like Meng Jueguang, he still held on to the last strand of luck. However, after a short while, Lin Yi slowly stood up amidst the exclamations of the entire audience. He cupped his hands towards Zhao Hongba and said indifferently, "Elder Zhao, I've already finished healing my injuries. Elder, please examine me." Zhao Hongba was stunned for a long time before he finally reacted. He walked in front of Lin Yi and examined him. His tone carried a trace of unconcealable shock as he nodded helplessly, "That's enough. There really aren't any obvious injuries." Even if he was an elder, he couldn't distort the truth. If he were to lie in front of everyone, Lin Yi could casually slap his face. Then he really wouldn't be able to keep his integrity in his old age. How was this possible? Hearing Zhao Hongba's words, Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang's last strand of luck was finally completely shattered. They were so depressed that they almost spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, both of their faces were ashen, as if their own father had died. At this moment, there was only one sound left in the entire audience, the sound of people gasping in shock. Zhao Hongba's words meant that not only did Lin Yi obtain the 30 strength points that the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment stage represented, he also obtained recovery points that were equivalent to 100% of his strength points because he had recovered within 2 hours. In other words, he obtained 30 recovery points. Adding the 2 points together, Lin Yi's total score for the second segment was 60 points. Because the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment stage was the second segment with the highest difficulty, it also meant that the 60 points that Lin Yi had obtained was the highest score that he could obtain in this segment. In addition to the full score of 45 points in the first segment of the suppression stage, Lin Yi had already obtained 2 god-level full scores after completing only 2 segments of the assessment. His total score had reached a godlike 105 points. On the other hand, Meng Tong, who was full of self-satisfaction and had sworn to trample on Lin Yi with all kinds of arrogance, was still sitting at the side healing his injuries with a pale face. He was afraid that the slightest bit of relaxation would cause the effects of the 4th-grade recover pill to dissipate, leaving behind a sequela. Looking at his appearance, being able to recover within a day was already not bad. In other words, although this fellow had the same 30 points as Lin Yi, his recovery points would at most be 60% of his strength points, which was 18 points. Adding the 2 points together, the total score for the second segment of the suppression stage was 48 points. In addition to the 24 points from the first segment of the suppression stage, adding the 2 segments together, Meng Tong's total score was only 72 points, which was a full 33 points difference from Lin Yi. Not only did he not take the opportunity to kill Lin Yi, he did not even have the most basic intention of catching up points. Instead, the difference in points was widened by Lin Yi. Chapter 37-27. After all, when he got full marks last time, they could still think that it was because of some problem with the pressure formation, and that Lin Yi had gotten lucky. But this time he was relying on real strength. He got full marks in 2 consecutive rounds. If this kind of performance didn't make people realize how awesome Lin Yi was, then they could only say that these people's brains had been kicked by donkeys. Junior brother Lin, you're really good. If it was me, I wouldn't have been able to take that hit. Senior brother Bitter Guy rarely showed such an excited expression. He clearly saw the danger of that hit just now. If it was him, he wouldn't have been able to survive, let alone be as relaxed as Lin Yi and survive with such a minor injury. What he didn't know was that Lin Yi's injury just now was not as light as it looked. Although he had the strength of the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm and had figured out the trick of using genuine chi to attack and defend, the lethality of that hit just now was comparable to 130% of the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. Even if it was on Lin Yi, it was still not to be underestimated. However, because of the art of dragon mastery and the space in the jade pendant, even if the injury was serious, Lin Yi could easily and quickly heal quickly. That was why he could do it so calmly and dazzle everyone's eyes. Not only senior brother Bitter Guy but also Xiao Ran, who had recovered from his injury, looked at Lin Yi with a burning gaze. He was so excited that he gave a thumbs up, and his admiration was overflowing. After all, this guy was a calm and introverted person. He was never good at expressing his feelings, let alone losing his composure when he was excited. But today Lin Yi's performance really opened his eyes. Lin Yi could be the first to succeed in the Foundation Establishment realm. This could only mean that he was talented, but it didn't mean that he was really awesome. But as a newcomer in the secular world who had only been in the Welcome Pavilion for a month, he was able to withstand the full blow of a peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm so easily. This was really awesome. Not to say that it was unprecedented, but it was definitely not an exaggeration to say that it was domineering. In the past, Xiao Ran only thought that boss Lin Yi, whom he was following, was a kind and honest person with great strength. But after today he had to add another label to it, tyrannical beyond compare. Even though Xiao Ran had been calm since he was a child, he couldn't help but feel a burning passion in his heart at this moment. If he followed such an overbearing and powerful boss like Lin Yi, his future would definitely be boundless. This was what Xiao Ran thought. Li Jingming, who was Lin Yi's underling, was thinking. At this moment he was even more shocked than him. It had to be known that he was different from Xiao Ran. Not only was he born on Heaven Stage Island, but he also came from the Clearwater Villa and had a superior family background. He had seen far more of the world since he was young than a newcomer from the secular world like Xiao Ran. But even so, Lin Yi's performance today almost made him bite off his tongue. He even unconsciously gave birth to a feeling of worship and awe from the bottom of his heart. Li Jingming couldn't help but murmur. No wonder boss Lin Yi clearly knew that the opponent had tampered with the situation and still dared to calmly accept the challenge of the early stage of Foundation establishment. He even dared to calmly accept the challenge of a peak early-stage foundation-building cultivator. It seemed that his foresight wasn't bad. He followed an extraordinary fellow. This lady really didn't make a mistake. Junior Lin Yi really hid his strength. Shanghai Laner couldn't brazenly show too much excitement, so she could only whisper excitedly to the little curly bear in her arms. Woo 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 woo. The little curly bear wrinkled its nose proudly. That goes without saying. TSK. I don't know who was the one who was so anxious just now. Shanghai Laner didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she rolled her eyes at it. Lin Yi was the last newcomer from Blue Cloud Pavilion to go on stage for the assessment. After he finished, it meant that all the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion had finished their assessment. Next, they just needed to wait for the newcomers to finish healing and they would be able to get the final points of the second round. After Blue Cloud Pavilion, it was Mysterious Pavilion's turn, and finally Blaster Pavilion's turn. With the previous performance of the Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomers as a reference, Whether it was the newcomers from Mysterious Pavilion or Blaster Pavilion, the choices they made were obviously more rational and reliable. In addition, their strength was higher than the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion, so their overall performance was naturally higher. However, it was worth mentioning that other than Meng Tong and Lin Yi, no newcomer from the other two pavilions dared to challenge the difficulty of the early stage of Foundation establishment. Even the two early-stage Foundation establishment masters, Kang Ming and Zhong Pingliang, chose to challenge the early-stage Foundation establishment, and didn't have any thoughts of skipping levels. After all, they weren't as strong as Lin Yi, nor did they have a fourth-level recovery elixir like Meng Tong. If they challenged the early-stage Foundation establishment peak, even if the examiner intentionally went easy on them, there was still a high chance that they would be killed in one move. It was better to play it safe. Anyway, the assessment points of the three pavilions were calculated separately. So what if Lin Yi got more God-level full marks? It had nothing to do with them. While the newcomers from Mysterious Pavilion and Blaster Pavilion were undergoing their assessment, the examiner in charge of the early-stage Foundation establishment peak was pulled to a corner by Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang. They wanted to know how Lin Yi was able to survive in such a situation, and so easily at that. Ma Jian, what happened just now? Did you use your full strength to deal with Lin Yi? Or did you secretly go easy on him, holding back like Meng Tong just now? Su Lingchong asked with an unfriendly expression. He couldn't understand what had happened today. No matter how he thought about it, he could only attribute the reason to Ma Jian. Other than this guy secretly going easy on Lin Yi, no other reason could explain how Lin Yi was able to pass so easily. In reality, even if Ma Jian secretly went easy on Lin Yi, it would still be impossible for Lin Yi to pass so easily. Think about it, Meng Tong, a guy who was on the same level as Lin Yi in name, had taken a fourth-level recovery elixir like the fourth-level recovery elixir and suffered a palm strike with 70% of the early-stage Foundation establishment peak strength. Even now he was still half dead. However, although it was hard to understand, compared to the nonsense of Lin Yi being able to easily withstand 130% of the early-stage Foundation establishment peak strength, this explanation was much more convincing. Young Master Su, you're being wrongly accused. I really used all my strength just now, I didn't hold back at all. Ma Jian saw that Su Lingchong was doubting him, his face instantly paled and he hurriedly cried out his innocence. Chapter 37-28. Really? Su Lingchong sized him up from the corner of his eyes, his expression was still doubtful. Absolutely. Ma Jian nodded his head heavily and hurriedly said, if I didn't use too much strength, I wouldn't have been caught off guard and rebounded by Lin Yi's true energy. What? True energy rebounded? That brat Lin Yi has such an ability? Su Lingchong was instantly flabbergasted, and he and Meng Jueguang looked at each other in dismay. Both of them were shrewd people, and from Ma Jian's current expression, they could basically determine that this fellow shouldn't be lying. They faintly felt that they seemed to have grasped the key point. True energy rebounded? Brother Lu, could it be that this brat Lin Yi has actually cultivated some kind of defensive martial skill? Meng Jueguang hurriedly asked. It should be, otherwise there's no way to explain why the true energy in this brat's body could rebound it onto my body. But I don't know what kind of defensive martial skill it is. Ma Jian nodded his head. Ever since he finished the test for Lin Yi, he had been pondering over this question. No matter how he thought about it, in the end he could only conclude that it was a defensive martial skill. Otherwise there was no other explanation. One had to know, disregarding those who specialized in defensive martial skills, ordinary cultivators could at most mobilize their true energy to defend against a portion of the damage. The only difference was the amount of damage they could defend against. As for people like Lin Yi who took advantage of the opportunity to use true energy to counterattack, it was simply unheard of. What he didn't know was that this was just an idea Lin Yi had come up with in a moment of inspiration to counter his attacks. Attacking and defending was a pure coincidence. If it was under normal circumstances, even if an ordinary person wanted to strengthen their defense, they would definitely choose to cultivate a defensive martial skill. This was the most orthodox and effective choice. If it was in a state of battle and there was no chance to make a last-minute effort, then in a situation where they knew their defense was not good, an ordinary person would focus on thinking of ways to avoid the opponent's attack, and not foolishly stay on the spot and let the opponent hit them. Even if he couldn't avoid the attack, he would definitely think of a way to counteract the other party's attack. He wouldn't have the time to come up with some strange idea of using his true chi to attack and defend. The so-called offensive defense that used the true chi in one's body was completely a strange product that was produced under the special circumstances of the resistance assessment. Because of the rules of the examination, when faced with the examiner's attack, the newcomers could neither dodge nor counterattack. They could only stand there and let the examiner hit them. This left the rookies with only one choice, and that was to quickly use a defensive martial technique. If he didn't, he could only rely on his jinchi to endure it. However, Linny had never been the kind of person who was willing to be beaten up. Even when faced with this kind of test, he would try his best to fight back within the rules. Because from a certain point of view, offense was the best defense. That was why he had thought of using the jinchi in his body to counterattack the moment the examiner attacked him. But if he was still a heaven-rank Great Perfection expert, then even if he thought of this idea, it would be useless because a heaven stage Great Perfection expert could only release true chi through their palms, and if he did so, it would obviously violate the assessment rules. The key was, Linny was no longer a heaven stage Great Perfection expert, but a peak early stage foundation establishment expert who had hidden his true strength in front of everyone. In fact, when he had just succeeded in building his foundation, he had already realized that compared to when he was at heaven stage Great Perfection, there was a huge difference in the way he released his true chi. That was, not only could he release his true chi through his palms, he could also do it directly from the acupoints all over his body. In most cases, this was not of much use. Because even if he could directly release true chi from the acupoints all over his body, true chi could only be true chi, and could not achieve the powerful effect of a martial technique. In other words, if Linny wanted to display the effect of the Raging Fire 8 trigrams palm, then he would have to rely on his hands. It was impossible to achieve this by using the acupoints all over his body. And if it was purely releasing true chi, it could be used to scare some small fries, but it would be very difficult to pose a threat to experts of the same level, so it was not practical. However, being able to release true chi from the acupoints all over his body, in a special situation like the resistance assessment, coupled with the offensive-defensive idea that Linny had come up with, produced an unimaginable effect. When the examiner's palm hit Lin Yi's chest with 130% of its power, before it could cause any damage, the first thing it collided with was the powerful true chi erupting from the acupoints on Lin Yi's chest. And because the space in the jade pendant could quickly replenish his true chi, Lin Yi did not have to worry about the true chi in his body being completely depleted. So he could be unrestrained, using all his true chi to counterattack. In this way, before the examiner's attack with 130% of its power had reached its target, a portion of the damage had already been neutralized. By the time his palm actually hit Lin Yi's chest, it was actually only left with less than 100% of its power. As a true early-stage foundation establishment expert, Lin Yi had to take a full blow from an expert of the same level head-on. No matter how heavily injured he was, it would definitely not be fatal. And with his art of dragon mastery combined with the endless pure true chi in the space in the jade pendant, healing this bit of injury was a piece of cake. That was why the scene that had blinded the eyes of everyone present had appeared. Taking a full blow from a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert head-on, and yet being able to recover from his injuries in such a short time without a change in expression. However, Su Lingchong and the others had no idea that Lin Yi had so many trump cards to rely on, and it was even more impossible for them to understand the various details within. From their point of view, if they wanted to explain this matter, there was only one possibility, and that was that Lin Yi had cultivated some kind of defensive martial arts technique. I'm guessing that my 130% attack just now had been neutralized at least 90% by this kid's defensive martial arts technique. In other words, the actual damage that hit his body was actually less than 40%, that's why he was able to sustain such light injuries. Ma Jian deduced. At the side, Meng Jueguang nodded in agreement. That's right, he's an early-stage foundation establishment expert like Meng Tong. In theory, there shouldn't be too much of a difference in their endurance. Meng Tong had only taken a palm attack with 70% of its power, and had even taken a 4th-grade Great Rejuvenation pill, yet he was still so heavily injured that he looked like he was on the brink of death. If it were Lin Yi, he would probably be in a similar state. So the only logical explanation is that the defensive martial arts technique he had used just now was rather powerful, enough to neutralize most of the damage from Brother Ma's palm. That's the only logical explanation. Chapter 37-29. As an expert who had just advanced to the early stage of the foundation establishment realm, he had mastered a defensive martial skill that could allow him to withstand an all-out attack from an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. Even in young Master Su's eyes, it was already enough to meet the standard of concealment. The key point was that in the past month or so, they had not found any signs on Lin Yi's body at all. He had really hidden himself well. Little did they know that this was purely their own imagination. Although Lin Yi had many trump cards, he did not have this type of defensive martial skill. They had really thought too much this time. Indeed, it's all my fault for not noticing this beforehand. This brat took advantage of the loophole and caused the plan to fail. Young Master Su, please punish me. Meng Jueguang hurriedly apologized with a face full of regret. Su Lingchong's face was gloomy and he did not speak for a long time. This time, in order to kill Lin Yi, in order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he had put in a lot of effort and capital. Not only did he come forward to persuade Zhao Hongba, the fourth elder of the Blue Cloud Pavilion, he even did not hesitate to take out a grade 4 Great Recover pill. In the end, not only was Lin Yi completely fine, but he had also obtained a full score of the god level just like last time. All his investment had gone down the drain. This was not the key point. Young Master Su's capital was lost. Even if it was the expensive grade 4 Great Recover pill, he did not care much about it. The key point was that this time, he had lost face in front of Shangguan Laner. 3 days ago he had already lost face in the law enforcement hall, and now he had lost it again. If this went on, how would he have the face to face Shangguan Laner in the future? Don't forget that his grandfather, Su Yuanjing, had given him a death order to climb up the Shangguan family's high branch. Whether the Su family could truly enter the ranks of the top wealthy families in the future depended on him alone. Looking at Su Lingchong's extremely unsightly expression, Meng Jueguang could not help but feel anxious. He did not even dare to breathe loudly for fear of provoking young Master Su's anger. Strictly speaking, although they did not succeed in dealing with Lin Yi, Meng Jueguang's performance was commendable. After all, from their point of view. If it wasn't for Lin Yi's powerful and evil defensive martial skill, it would be impossible for anyone else to fail. To put it bluntly, this was not his fault at all. Meng Jueguang could not be blamed for not doing his best. He could only blame Lin Yi for being too strange. But something went wrong. Meng Jueguang was the mastermind behind the plot against Lin Yi. If he didn't take the initiative to apologize, how could young Master Su get off the stage? Alright, it's not your fault this time, Elder Meng. So what if Lin Yi escapes this time? He's still a fish on our chopping block. He won't be able to jump around for long. Su Lingchong suppressed the anger in his heart. He patted Meng Jueguang's shoulder comfortingly. After all, Su Lingchong was the future successor of the Su family, taught by Su Yuanjing. He was not a pure hedonistic second generation. He knew that if he wanted to be successful, apart from being able to lose, he also needed to be tolerant. And from Meng Jueguang's previous performance, he was indeed a talent. It was just that he was buried because his background in Blue Cloud Pavilion was too poor. It was just right for him to take him in and use him. Thank you for your magnanimity, young Master Su. Elder Meng will definitely go through water and tread on fire for young Master Su in the future. Meng Jueguang hurriedly flattered and expressed his loyalty. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In this way he could continue to look forward to his position as the third pavilion master. Being able to lose, being tolerant, coupled with his deep background and generous spending, this young Master Su was really a wise leader. Su Lingchong smiled. Then he sternly instructed, although we have plenty of opportunities to crush Lin Yi like an ant, we still have to learn from this lesson. Next time, before we deal with him, we must first understand his background to avoid any accidents. Meng Jueguang nodded repeatedly. He patted his chest and guaranteed, don't worry, young Master Su. This time when we go back, I will let Meng Tong, Li Jingming, and the others find a way to understand Lin Yi's background to ensure that the next plan is foolproof. Good, then it depends on your performance. Su Lingchong nodded, and his gaze immediately fell on Shanghai Laner in the distance. His headache now was how to explain to this little junior sister why he failed twice in a row. As a dignified young master of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he ended up stumbling in the hands of Lin Yi, a newcomer in the secular world. This matter was really a bit unjustifiable. Fortunately, there were no other young masters present, otherwise Su Lingchong would really lose his face. After hesitating for a long time, Su Lingchong braced himself and walked to Shanghai Laner's side. With an embarrassed expression, he whispered, "Little junior sister Lan, this time because of the lack of information, Lin Yi took advantage of the loophole. But don't worry, next time he won't be so lucky. Senior brother, I will definitely teach him a good lesson to vent your anger." Humph. Shanghai Laner snorted. Originally, she didn't intend to pay attention to him, but after thinking about it she still added, "Remember to inform me next time." Of course, of course. Su Lingchong hurriedly nodded in response. He was afraid that Shanghai Laner would ignore him from then on. As long as this little girl was willing to come out with him, everything would be fine. In this way he still had to properly thank Lin Yi. Otherwise it wouldn't be easy to ask this little girl out. This was a good opportunity to take more contact with her, win her heart, and lay a good foundation for him to win her heart in the future. Unbeknownst to him, Shanghai Laner was purely considering for Lin Yi's sake. If Su Lingchong had any plans she could know in advance and inform Lin Yi. Although it was the same as the previous 2 times, Su Lingchong wouldn't tell her the specific details, but she could still get a general idea, so that Lin Yi could prepare in advance. However, what Shanghai Laner didn't know was that Lin Yi had successfully planted 2 spies in Su Lingchong's group, Zhong Pingliang and Li Jingming. If she was included, then there would be 3 spies. The scale of the intelligence team was simply unprecedented. If Su Lingchong's group could still mess with Lin Yi, then the sun would really rise from the west. In just a short half a day, all the newcomers from the 3 pavilions had completed the assessment. However, the second segment was not over yet. After all, there were so many newcomers who had not recovered from their injuries. Before their injuries were completely healed and they confirmed that they had obtained the corresponding recovery points. According to the rules, they could only stay in the main hall of the Welcome Pavilion. Otherwise, their recovery points would be counted as 0. Chapter 3730. Once fairness was lost, the so-called newcomer assessment would be completely meaningless. This was because, no matter how much effort was put into it, it would be impossible for the newcomers with true potential to stand out. The 3 pavilions had invested so many cultivation resources, it would really be a waste. However, those who had yet to recover from their injuries needed to stay in the Welcome Pavilion to receive supervision. Newcomers like Lin Yi, who had already been examined by Zhao Hongba, were not subject to this restriction. They could return to their cave abodes early to carry out their daily cultivation. In consideration of the newcomers who were more seriously injured in this segment, the 3rd segment of the newcomer assessment would begin in 10 days. Normally, 10 days was enough for a rookie to recover from his injuries, no matter how heavily injured he was. If he had not recovered after 10 days, then the rookie would not have much of a future. So what if it affected his performance in the next round of the assessment? They were all trash anyway, and trash never had human rights. For a newcomer like Lin Yi who had completely recovered on the spot, these 10 days were a very rare opportunity to rest and recuperate. According to the rules of the assessment announced on the announcement, the subsequent segments would not end on the same day like the previous 2 segments. Instead, it would be a rather long battle of attrition. Not only would it consume one's physical strength, but it would also consume one's mental energy. Hence, if one did not take the opportunity to recuperate, it was very likely that unexpected problems would occur. Apart from recuperating, in these 10 days, the ambitious newcomers could also specifically prepare for the next segment of the assessment. Although it was also a last-minute effort, it was better than not doing it at all. However, while the others were smug in preparing for the next segment, Lin Yi did not take this matter to heart. He cultivated when he needed to cultivate, mined when he needed to. His daily routine was exactly the same as before. When the others saw his leisurely manner, apart from feeling envious, they did not dare to say anything to mock him. After all, he had 2 god-level full marks in his hands. His superhuman strength had been completely revealed. Naturally, he had the capital to be leisurely. At this time, if they still mocked him like before, it would only mean that they were idiots. In these 10 days, Lin Yi also received information from Li Jingming. Meng Jueguang and his gang planned to use all sorts of methods to understand his strength in the next segment of the assessment. He had to think of all kinds of ways to figure out the ins and outs of his strength, especially this defensive martial skill that he had hidden so deeply. Defensive martial technique? When he first received the report, Lin Yi was completely stunned. It was only after he read Li Jingming's explanation of why this group of people came up with this speculation that he came back to his senses. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was clearly a stroke of genius. In the end, people thought that he had purposely hidden a strong defensive martial technique. The development of this matter was a little strange, making Lin Yi blush with shame. However, this was also good. Meng Jueguang and the others thought that after they figured out the reason, they would no longer question why he was able to withstand the 130% power of the early stage of foundation establishment. This way, at least Lin Yi's true strength would not be exposed, which was a good thing. As for the so-called defensive martial skill, Since this group of people like to guess like this, then let them guess. The more they guessed, the better. Maybe when the time came, Lin Yi wouldn't even need to do anything. They would guess it themselves and it would save a lot of trouble. In addition, what Lin Yi had to do every day was to go to the Spirit Jade Hall to dig in the mines during the day and steal 2 or 3 pieces of waste jade. At night, he would come back to continue cultivating and consolidate the strength of the early stage of foundation establishment. However, before entering the next segment of the assessment, there was still an important event waiting in front of Lin Yi. The monthly open day of the inner street had finally arrived. Since the last time he saw the star ink stone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi had been thinking about it and made all sorts of preparations for it. After all, this damn thing was once one of the strongest people in the entire Heavenly Island. Something that even he had to look up to was definitely not an ordinary thing. Lin Yi was naturally determined to get it. However, thinking of the last time he met the inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion who was similarly interested in the star ink stone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. Although the star ink stone's price of 1,000 spirit jades was enough to make most people shrink back, and because of its unattractive appearance, very few people would pay attention to it. Even less people would spend so many spirit jades to buy a broken stone of no use at all. However, there were still people in the world who knew what was good for them, such as that inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Judging from his performance at that time, this inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion should not have enough spirit jades on him. Moreover, although he was from the Soaring Sky Pavilion, apart from young masters like Su Lingchong who had an extremely deep background, 1,000 spirit jades was still a huge sum of money for the majority of the inner disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was not that easy to gather. However, if one really wanted to do it, if one was really determined to get it, it might not be impossible to gather 1,000 spirit jades. At least, Lin Yi had heard from senior brother Ku Bai that some of the inner disciples of the 3 great pavilions were privately taking loans at high interest. If one went through this route, although the price was huge and could even be said to be absolutely disastrous, it was not difficult to gather 1,000 spirit jades. Lin Yi didn't know whether that inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion was as determined to get it as he was, and even more so didn't know how determined that person would be for the star ink stone. However, at this moment he already felt an indescribable pressure. If that person really gritted his teeth and gathered 1,000 spirit jades, and if that person had the right to freely enter and exit the inner streets, unlike him who had to wait for the inner streets to be opened, then he would really miss the opportunity to obtain the star ink stone. Moreover, an entire month had already passed. Apart from that person, could there be other competitors who knew what was good for them? Perhaps that piece of star ink stone had already fallen into someone else's hands? For a moment, Lin Yi actually felt a little worried about his personal gains and losses. However, he immediately reacted and laughed in spite of himself. If I get it, I'll be lucky. If I don't, it's my fate. Regardless of whether I can get it or not, as long as I do my best, there's nothing to regret. After calculating the date, in the wee hours of the inner streets being open to the public, Lin Yi put on the 1,000-thread mask and left under the stars and the moon. He planned to rush to the Hong Merchant Guild to snatch the star ink stone as soon as the inner streets were open to the public. If he arrived and discovered that the star ink stone had already been bought by someone else, then he could only say that this was his fate and that he was not the fated person for the star ink stone. Chapter 37-31. However, though the inner street wasn't open to the public yet, the outer and middle streets already had many vendors opening their stalls. Though there weren't many customers right now, to these vendors the market wasn't just a place to sell their wares. To some extent it was also a place to purchase goods. The so-called purchase meant that many people would sell some of the heavenly materials and earthly treasures they had obtained through various channels to the merchants in the outer and middle streets at a price slightly lower than the market price. These merchants could then resell the treasures to others in the following market transactions and earn the difference in price. The reason why these people didn't directly set up their stalls in the market and sell their wares to customers at a higher price was because they had their own concerns. First of all, they weren't traditional vendors. They weren't popular in the market and they didn't have much credibility. Even if they set up their stalls, they may not be able to sell their wares in a short amount of time. Secondly, the methods they used to obtain treasures of heaven and earth were usually not so legitimate. If they were to be displayed in broad daylight, it was very likely to cause trouble for them. At that time, once they were targeted in the marketplace, it would be difficult for them to escape. Therefore, to these people, instead of setting up their own stalls, it was more convenient to sell their wares to the vendors here. Though the price would be lower, they would be able to get spiritual jades at the same time. This would save them a lot of unnecessary trouble. Therefore, a unique phenomenon formed in the market. Most of the vendors would set up their stalls very early in the morning. But before the sun rose, they wouldn't sell their wares and would only purchase their wares. The reason why they set their stalls at midnight, a time when there were very few people, was for the sake of secrecy. The people who sold their wares needed to be as inconspicuous as possible, and the vendors didn't want to be surrounded by people when they were purchasing their wares. Because if they did, their bottom price would be leaked. It would be very difficult to do business. Looking at the busy scene, Lin Yi suddenly had an idea. If he wanted to buy something, he could choose this time to buy it before these people sold their wares to the vendors. If he intercepted their wares in advance, the price would be much cheaper than buying them in the market. However, on second thought, this idea wasn't very reliable. After all, these people had their own network of connections. Even if you had a lot of spiritual jades in your hands, they wouldn't necessarily be willing to sell their treasures to you. They might not even be willing to sell their treasures to you directly. Who knows if you are reliable? To dispose of stolen goods, one had to be reliable. People would definitely choose a familiar face and not a stranger. However, although this occasion wasn't suitable for buying things, it was suitable for selling things. And Lin Yi suddenly remembered that in his jade pendant space, there was really a pile of good things that could be exchanged for spiritual jades. This item was the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard that he had hunted in the outskirts of the back mountain. Although it wasn't a rare heavenly treasure, as a rare early-stage Foundation establishment spirit beast, its carcass was no less valuable than a heavenly treasure. He should be able to sell it for a good price. However, the most valuable part of the corpse, the inner core, had already been dug out by Lin Yi in advance. It was not because he wanted to use it but because the ghost had asked for it. As a senior who lived in the space of his jade pendant, Lin Yi naturally agreed to such a small request from the ghost and took it out without hesitation. However, the ghost did not say what it wanted the inner core for. It only asked Lin Yi to take it out and temporarily store it for it. That was all. Seeing that it was still early, Lin Yi turned around and went to a secluded place with no one around. He took out the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard from the space of the jade pendant and dragged it out from the corner. Although the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard was heavy, weighing more than a ton, it was not difficult for a peak early-stage Foundation establishment expert like Lin Yi to carry it. However, the commotion he made along the way was not small and quickly attracted the attention of the people in the marketplace. This is the nine-tailed cloud leopard? Those with good eyesight quickly recognized it and gasped. Admittedly, to the cultivators in the marketplace, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was only at the early Foundation establishment stage and was not very strong. However, this was a famous and extremely cunning ferocious beast of the forest. This kind of spiritual beast was famous for its cunning and ferocity. If one wanted to hunt it in the deep forest of the back mountain, even an expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm wouldn't be able to do it, let alone an expert at the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. In theory, to hunt such a cunning ferocious beast would require at least 2 mid-stage Foundation establishment experts. In addition, they would have to spend a great deal of patience and energy in the deep forests of the mountains. Only then would they have a chance of successfully killing it. It would not be an exaggeration to say that among all early Foundation establishment spiritual beasts, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was not only one of the strongest, it was also the most troublesome ferocious beast to deal with. Many times, even mid-stage Foundation establishment experts would not be willing to provoke it. Spirit traders in the marketplace. There were quite a few merchants in the market. Every day one could see the corpses of all kinds of spiritual beasts being dragged here to be sold. However, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was extremely rare. In the eyes of the merchants in the marketplace, the nine-tailed cloud leopard's strength could not be considered high, but in terms of rarity, it could definitely be ranked in the top 5. Moreover, the nine-tailed cloud leopard's entire body was a treasure. Whether it was the bones or the internal organs, every part of it was a real treasure. This was a rare and highly sought-after commodity. For a moment, Lin Yi unexpectedly became the focus of all the spirit traders. Some of them even impatiently crowded around him, afraid that others in the same trade would beat them to it. After all, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was a rare resource that could be used to establish a brand. It was something that could only be encountered by chance. If they missed this opportunity, they would never be able to find another shop like this one. Brother, how are you going to sell this nine-tailed cloud leopard? Are you going to sell it as a whole or retail sale? Seeing that other merchants were hurrying over, a bearded middle-aged man closest to Lin Yi hurriedly asked, "Oh, What about selling it as a whole? What about retail? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows and asked without batting an eyelid. If you sell it as a whole, then you sell it as a whole at a fixed price. If you sell it as a retail, then you have to separate the body parts and sell them one by one according to their value. The bearded middle-aged man paused for a moment, then asked, "Brother, you look unfamiliar. You don't come to this marketplace often, do you?" Chapter 37-32. Then I suggest you do a better job. Although the price will be higher if you sell it at retail, you're not familiar with the people here, so you might not be able to sell it all in a short time. Brother, you also know that although the carcass of this early-stage foundation establishment spirit beast doesn't decay that fast, once it's cut open, the spiritual energy will quickly dissipate. After a long time, it will depreciate. What do you think, brother? The middle-aged bearded man analyzed with a sincere look on his face. Moreover, it's illegal to sell the carcasses of spirit beasts in private. Without a strong background, it'll be troublesome if the spirit beasts of the South Island find out about it. Of course, brother, you don't have to be afraid of trouble. I'm just reminding you. Oh, let me think about it. Lin Yi responded non-committally, but he didn't directly answer how he wanted to sell it. Although this middle-aged bearded man spoke very sincerely, and it sounded like it was true, he was a merchant here after all. He couldn't appear too impatient when dealing with merchants, especially when there were many merchants coming over to ask for a price. If he rashly gave the other party any promises now, it would be difficult to sell it at a higher price later. Seeing Lin Yi's unshakable expression, the middle-aged bearded man could only sigh helplessly. He originally thought that Lin Yi was unfamiliar, so he wanted to trick Lin Yi into selling it to him at a fixed price before the others. As long as Lin Yi nodded slightly, according to the rules of the market, others wouldn't be able to compete with him at a higher price even if they wanted to. Unfortunately, although Lin Yi was young, he had seen enough of these things so he wouldn't be easily fooled. In less than a moment, the number of merchants who surrounded Lin Yi to express their interest in the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard had reached 5 or 6. Lin Yi smiled secretly. This could practically be a small auction. However, this was a good thing. With so many people competing with each other, at least he didn't have to worry about losing out. Seeing that almost everyone had arrived, Lin Yi didn't want to delay any longer and make too much noise. After all, he still had important matters to attend to. He immediately cupped his hands towards these merchants and said, "Everyone, I intend to sell this nine-tailed cloud leopard carcass. If you are interested, please name a price. According to the market rules, the highest bidder wins." The reason why he chose to sell them in bulk instead of retail was naturally to save time. Otherwise, he might not be able to sell them all even if he stayed here for a whole day, let alone finishing within an hour before the inner street opened. Furthermore, even if it was not because he was in a hurry, Lin Yi would not covet this little bit of spiritual jade simply because he wanted to keep his identity a secret. After all, there was only 1,000 silk mask. If this face was recognized by others, it would not be easy to use it to hide one's identity in the future. The merchants looked at each other, their eyes filled with helplessness. Although it was a common market rule that the highest bidder wins, as sellers they were very happy to see such a scene. But now they were in the position of the buyer, which was somewhat disadvantageous to them. Because if they were to fight to the death, the one who would benefit in the end would not be any one of them but only Lin Yi, the seller. And yet, even though they knew that this wasn't a good deal, they could only grit their teeth and continue. After all, this nine-tailed cloud-piercing panther was a strategic and rare resource. If they just ignored it and allowed it to be bought by others in the same trade, then in the future, a large number of their customers might be snatched away. That would be a truly disastrous loss. Originally, Lin Yi had just thought that this corpse was useless to him, and that piling it up in the jade pendant space was a waste of space. As such, he might as well sell it for some spiritual jades. From the very start, he had never expected that this situation would be so advantageous. It seemed that his luck today wasn't bad. He should be able to earn quite a bit of spiritual jades, which would be just enough for him to go to the inner street and compete for that piece of staring stone. "Brother, before bidding, can we first inspect the corpse to see if it's intact?" one of the merchants asked. Lin Yi nodded. "Of course. Apart from the Niden which I've already taken out, I haven't touched any other parts. You can inspect it yourselves." All of the merchants present were experienced people. Whether or not the corpse had been tampered with, they only needed to casually flip it over to see. There was no way it could be hidden from their eyes and ears. After flipping through the corpse, they nodded in satisfaction. Normally speaking, the most important and valuable part of a spirit beast's corpse was its Niden. Once the Niden was dug out, while the other parts weren't completely worthless, their value would drop by at least half. But to these merchants who weren't interested in this, as long as the corpse was intact enough to prove that it was a cloud nine-tailed panther, they would be able to use this as a pretext to obtain their eyeballs. That was enough. As for whether or not the Niden was still there, that was actually a secondary problem. Because in the end, even if it was a cloud nine-tailed panther's Niden, it was only an early-stage Foundation establishment Niden. It was essentially no different from the Niden of other spirit beasts of the same level. Although it wasn't cheap, it wasn't all that rare. However, these people were, after all, merchants. They definitely wouldn't pass up on an opportunity to haggle. Although the corpse of a cloud nine-tailed panther is relatively rare, because its Niden has already been dug out, the price has to be reduced by quite a bit. How about this? I'll bid 80 spirit jades. 80 spirit jades? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows without batting an eyelid, but he didn't say anything. The last 2 times he had come to the market square, he had seen the prices of some spirit beast corpses. Spirit beasts at the early stage Foundation establishment stage were generally priced at more than 100 spirit jades. Furthermore, they were all corpses without Nadens. For a rare commodity like the cloud nine-tailed panther, even if these merchants wanted to make a profit, there was no way they would lower the price to such a low price. A price of 80 spirit jades was simply bullying a layman like him. Although Lin Yi didn't say anything, his disapproval was already very clear. The merchant who had just bid couldn't help but curse at his miscalculation. He wanted nothing more than to slap himself in the face on the spot. Out of a professional habit, he had subconsciously wanted to squeeze as much as possible out of Lin Yi. He hadn't reacted in time. With so many people in the same trade as him, this wasn't a situation where he could lower the price. It was more like raising the price. Chapter 37-33. With just one sentence, the surrounding merchants immediately glared at him, especially the merchant who had just made a bid. His face was flushed red, but he seemed to be quite afraid of this middle-aged bearded man. He only dared to be angry but did not dare to say anything. 150 spiritual jades? Lin Yi's heart stirred. This price could not be considered low. At least, among all the early Foundation establishment realm spirit beast carcasses he had seen before, this was already the highest price. This bearded middle-aged man was indeed quite straightforward. Seeing that Lin Yi was a little tempted, the other merchant beside him couldn't help but become anxious. He hurriedly said, "I'll pay 160 spirit jades." The bearded middle-aged man glanced at the man, and without even lifting his eyelids, he immediately raised the price, 180 spirit jades. When the others saw how wealthy and confident he was, they all felt helpless. Although the carcass of a nine-tailed cloud leopard was extremely rare, it was still an early-stage Foundation establishment realm spirit beast. This price had already exceeded the upper limit. If they raised the price even more, even if they managed to get their hands on it, even if they successfully sold it, they wouldn't be able to make much profit. They would just be working for Lin Yi, a stranger they had never met before. But even so, a merchant gritted his teeth and increased the price. "I bid 185 spiritual jades." However, before Lin Yi could react, the bearded middle-aged man immediately called out, 200 spirit jades. With that, all the other merchants stopped talking. If he were to purchase the corpse of an early Foundation establishment spirit beast for more than 200 spirit jades, even if it was an extremely rare cloud-piercing panther, it would be a loss. It would be impossible for him to make any profit. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but think highly of this bearded middle-aged man. To be honest, the first impression that this person gave him was that he was a typical businessman. He seemed sincere and enthusiastic, but in fact he was secretly scheming. Who knew when he would be ripped off by him? But now, it seemed that even if this person was a businessman, he was also a bold one. For the corpse of a cloud-piercing panther without a Niden, he dared to offer a high price of 200 spirit jades without batting an eyelid, making his competitors speechless. This kind of boldness was not something an ordinary person could have. Lin Yi looked at the other people's faces, and he was sure that they wouldn't be bidding anymore. Just as he was about to make his decision, a passerby sighed and looked at Lin Yi. "This is a rare item, it's hard to come by. It's a pity to sell it." Lin Yi couldn't help but be stunned, and he carefully sized up this person. His appearance was ordinary, and his clothes were rather sloppy and ordinary. It could even be said to be shabby, and his strength couldn't be considered to be very strong. He only looked like he was at the peak of the early stage of Foundation establishment, so he was not conspicuous at all in the crowd. However, after taking a closer look, Linny realized that this person's temperament was rather different from others. It was not the temperament of a genius, but the temperament of a scientist who persistently studied something all year round. If he had to find someone around him as an example, this person gave Linny the feeling. He was somewhat similar to Han Jingjing. Although Han Jingjing was a little muddle-headed in her daily life and didn't seem to have any special talents, when it came to alchemy, her talent could be said to be unprecedented. If she really developed, she could even belong to the kind of phenomenal existence that could turn the entire alchemy world upside down and lead the future of change. And this ordinary-looking person in front of him also had such an extraordinary temperament. It was just that his talent might not necessarily be in alchemy. Before Lin Yi could speak, the middle-aged bearded man beside him became anxious. He glared at this person and said unhappily, "Trash King, you poor fellow, what nonsense are you spouting? I offered 200 spirit jades to buy this brother's cloud-piercing panther corpse, and you actually say it's a pity? If you have the ability, then give me a higher price. Let alone 200 spirit jades, you probably can't even take out 20 spirit jades." The person called Trash King immediately became embarrassed. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he couldn't help but wave his hands in embarrassment and say, "I'm not saying that selling it for 200 spirit jades is a pity. The price of 200 spirit jades is indeed very high, but some things can only be found by chance and are priceless. If the front claws and tail of the cloud-piercing panther were used to forge weapons, the value of the forged weapons would be at least over 2,000 spirit jades." "Dizzy, you're just bluffing. With your Trash King skills, you can forge weapons worth 2,000 spirit jades? Who are you trying to fool?" The middle-aged bearded man glared at him, then turned to Lin Yi and explained, "Brother, don't listen to this kid's crazy talk. This kid is the most unpopular inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion. His name is Wang Lampa, and he doesn't know how to do anything but forge weapons. He even calls himself a master blacksmith. He often buys the leftover bits and pieces of spirit beast corpses from us, but he's never forged anything decent. They're all a pile of trash, so we always call him Trash King." Listening to the middle-aged bearded man's introduction, the Trash King was so anxious that his face turned red. He hurriedly explained, "That's because you guys don't know anything about blacksmithing. When it comes to blacksmithing, quality trumps everything else. A true master blacksmith will use the worst materials to forge the best weapons. As for the success rate, it's only secondary. I'm just a little lower. As far as I know, you've never truly forged a weapon successfully, have you? How dare you say that your success rate is just a little lower?" The middle-aged bearded man and the others who knew about this guy burst into laughter. "Blacksmithing masters only talk about quality, not success rate. What do you amateurs know?" The Trash King continued to defend himself with a flushed face. However, judging from the reactions of the crowd, it was obvious that his efforts were in vain. Lin Yi, who was watching coldly from the sidelines, could not help but smile when he saw this. This Trash King was an interesting person. He was like the Kong Iji of the cultivation world. Just as the crowd was teasing the Trash King, Lin Yi suddenly asked, "Brother Wang, did you just say that the front claws and tail of the nine-tailed cloud leopard are good materials for forging weapons?" The crowd was stunned. They stared at Lin Yi strangely and exchanged glances with one another. Does this guy really believe the Trash King's nonsense? Chapter 37-34. Unfortunately, before Lin Yi officially agreed to sell the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard, he could do whatever he wanted with it. No one else had the right to intervene. Therefore, even if the middle-aged bearded man was full of anger, he could only vent his anger on the Jinx King of Junk. Seeing that Lin Yi seemed to believe his words, the King of Junk suddenly became spirited. He nodded repeatedly without caring about other people's expressions. "It's definitely a good material that can only be found by chance. If it can be used to cast weapons, its value will definitely be far more than 200 spiritual jades. Thank you for your advice." Lin Yi pondered for a moment, then turned to the middle-aged bearded man and said, "I'm sorry, I plan to keep the front paw and the tail for my own use and sell the rest as a whole. Do you still want to buy it? Of course the price can be lower." Don't forget, Lin Yi was also a blacksmith just like the King of Junk in front of him. It was just that he didn't have a master, no information, and no crafting scroll, so he couldn't try. Now, after hearing the King of Junk's reminder, he suddenly had an idea. Instead of selling the front paw and the tail, he might as well keep them for his own use. He couldn't find a blacksmith in the secular world before, but this was the Heaven Stage Island. As long as he was willing, it wasn't difficult to find information about blacksmithing, and he might even have the chance to become a real blacksmith in the future. The king of junk in front of him, who claimed to be a blacksmith master, was the proof. Hearing Lin Yi's suggestion, the middle-aged bearded man frowned, but then he patted his chest and said with a forthright expression, "Anyway, I'm buying the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard to make a signboard, not to sell it. You can keep the front paw and the tail if you want, as long as the rest can be used as a signboard. But as for the spiritual jades, I'll still give you 200 spiritual jades, just treat it as making a friend. I, Chen Heihu, won't be so stingy over such a small amount of spiritual jades." Chen Heihu? Lin Yi was a little surprised. "My surname is Chen Heihu is the nickname given to me by the people in the market. How about it? It fits my image, doesn't it? How should I address you, brother?" Chen Heihu laughed and deliberately stroked his thick beard. Thank you very much. My name is Lin Air." Lin Yi nodded and casually came up with an alias that he had never used before. Chen Heihu nodded and immediately ordered a servant beside him to cut off the front claws and tail of the cloud-piercing leopard. At the same time, he picked out 200 pieces of good jade full of spiritual energy and handed them to Lin Yi. "Brother Chen Heihu, since my cloud leopard's body isn't complete, it's not a very good one. You're very generous, giving me 200 spirit jades, but I can't just accept it like that." Lin Yi waved his hand. "I saw it in your friend's backpack, but I can't accept it just like that. There are also some spiritual jades of poor quality. Why don't you give me those spiritual jades?" Chen Heihu stared blankly. He didn't expect Lin Yi to not be a greedy person. He did have some spirit jades of poor quality. You can't pick your customers when you're doing business, right? You have to take whatever people give you. Of course. Those spiritual jades were usually given in threes. If it was just one, he wouldn't do it. Chen Heihu thought for a moment and said, "There's no need for that. Those spiritual jades aren't of good quality and aren't full of spiritual energy. Since we're brothers, I naturally can't cheat you." Although this exchange would save him a lot of money. He could save a lot of money, but he was a straightforward person, so he didn't care about that. "That's right, that's why I'm doing this," Lin Yi said resolutely, "otherwise I won't be able to do business with you next time." Seeing Lin Yi's determination, Chen Heihu could only nod and say, "Then I'll take advantage of you this time. Brother Lin, if you hunt any spirit beasts in the future, you must take care of me. Don't worry. The price will definitely satisfy you." The reason why he was so straightforward before, apart from needing the nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard, was because he wanted to make friends with Lin Yi. Of course, now he felt that not only was Lin Yi's strength superb, but his character was also very good. Because Lin Yi didn't intentionally hide his strength, Chen Heihu could clearly feel that Lin Yi was only an expert in the early stage of the foundational realm. He wasn't considered strong on Heaven Stage Island, where foundational realm experts were everywhere. However, the more it was like this, the more precious Lin Yi was. It wasn't rare for an expert in the middle stage of the foundational realm to be able to hunt a nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard. However, for an expert in the early stage of the foundational realm, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Those who could do this were all geniuses among men. As a shrewd and experienced businessman, Chen Heihu had his own way of looking at people. He knew who had a bright future and needed to befriend as much as possible, and who didn't have a bright future to look at. In his eyes, Lin Yi was naturally the former, while the tattered king was the latter. Of course, Lin Yi nodded. In the future he would have to deal with all kinds of powerful spiritual beasts. If he hunted and killed any spiritual beasts, he could sell them to Chen Heihu to save himself some trouble. After chatting with Chen Heihu for a while, Lin Yi saw that the sky was getting brighter. It was almost time for the back street to open. Lin Yi immediately said goodbye and left. However, after a few steps, he suddenly felt that someone was following him. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that someone was greedy for money? Although 200 spiritual jade was not a lot, it was enough for some people to take the risk. Under the cover of the gradually increasing crowd, Lin Yi turned around and observed for a while. Then he found that the person following him was the tattered king. Lin Yi was puzzled. Why was this guy following him? Did he really want to kill him? But it didn't look like it. Judging by the strength of this guy, he was definitely not strong among the experts in the early stage of the foundational realm. He shouldn't be so daring as to target him, right? Seeing that Lin Yi had noticed him, the tattered king quickly walked up to him. After a moment of hesitation, he plucked up his courage and asked, "Brother Lin, what do you plan to do with the front claws and tail of the nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard?" Lin Yi was even more puzzled. "I can use my own things however I want. Why should I tell an outsider I don't know?" Chapter 37-35. Linny nodded. It was easy to understand. In theory, being a blacksmith was even more expensive than being an alchemist. It was normal for an inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion like the worn-out king to be unable to cook without rice. Pausing for a moment, the tattered king took a deep breath and stared at Linny with a burning gaze. The front claws and tail of the cloud nine-tailed leopard are both rare materials that can only be found by luck. If second brother Lin trusts me, you can come to Clear Cloud Pavilion anytime. I'm willing to forge weapons for you for free. I see. Only then did Linny figure out the worn-out king's intention. He did not reply immediately. Instead he asked, "May I know where your master is? Is there a place in the 3 pavilions that specializes in training blacksmiths?" The worn-out king was stunned for a moment. He replied, "No, blacksmiths are a very unpopular profession. As far as I know, there aren't many serious blacksmiths in the North Island, but there are quite a few in the Middle Island. As for my master, I learned from a blacksmith master named Sun Sikong by chance for a few days. The rest is what I learned from the materials. Don't worry, I can't boast about anything else, but I'm definitely good at forging weapons." Can't boast about anything? Linny could not help but laugh. But Chin Heihu and the others just said that you've never succeeded in forging weapons? Oh, the worn-out king choked. No matter how much he thought of himself as a blacksmith genius, it was a bloody fact. That was why people called him the worn-out king. I believe you'll succeed. If there's a chance in the future, I'll come to Blue Cloud Pavilion to look for you. Linny smiled at him. He had a good impression of the worn-out king. He could tell that the worn-out king was a guy with real skills. However, even if he only had the worst materials, he still insisted on forging top-notch weapons. It would be a miracle if he could succeed in forging weapons with such a weird philosophy. In any case, the front claws and tail of the cloud nine-tailed leopard were useless in his hands. If he had the time in the future, he might as well look for this fellow and study it together. Perhaps they could really forge something decent. Are you really willing to believe me? The king of junk was overjoyed. Originally, he didn't have any expectations for this matter. He just didn't want these good casting materials to be wasted, but he didn't expect Lin Yi to agree. One had to know that although the profession of being a blacksmith had always been sought after, there were only a handful of people who could truly live up to this title. For a blacksmith like the king of junk who had never forged a decent weapon, he was a complete joke in the eyes of others. No one would take his words seriously. It was even more impossible for them to hand over their rare materials to him, not even if the king of junk volunteered to forge for free. Because once these materials were used to forge, there would only be 2 results. Either they succeeded and became a part of the divine weapon, or they failed. From then on, it became a pile of trash and no longer had any value. With the king of junk's embarrassing history, how could he succeed? Only a ghost would believe him. Oh, even a ghost would not believe him. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that out of 10,000 people, 9,999 people would not believe in the king of junk's ability. However, he was lucky today. He met the last person who was willing to believe in him. To him, this was probably the last straw to clutch at. If he couldn't seize this opportunity to clear his name, he might have to spend the rest of his life with this embarrassing title of King of Rags. Seeing that Lin Yi nodded affirmatively, the king of junk was so excited that he couldn't speak coherently. Then, thank you so much. Brother Lin, don't worry, I'll definitely forge something good for you. I won't waste these great materials. Whenever you're free, come find me at the Blue Cloud Pavilion. I'll be waiting for you. Alright, I've got some urgent matters to attend to at the moment. I'll be counting on you when the time comes. Lin Yi responded. Although he believed that the king of junk had the ability to forge weapons. After all, the guy's embarrassing 0 success rate was right in front of him. He had to be careful. If he handed the materials to the king of junk hastily, it might really go to waste. Therefore, even though he had promised the king of junk to help him forge weapons, Lin Yi decided to follow him throughout the process. He could also observe and learn how to forge weapons. No matter what, the king of junk was a proper blacksmith. His attainments in the aspect of blacksmithing were much more profound than that of a layman like Zhang Tai, who had to fumble around by himself. After all, although Lin Yi had repaired the godly pesticide cauldron, expanded the space of the jade pendant, made the essence necklace and forged the heaven-level heavenly weapon by himself, these could not be considered as real forging weapons. If he wanted to forge a real heavenly weapon by himself, he still had to put in the effort and learn systematically. That was because forging weapons was not based on a blueprint. It required creation and combining different materials into one. It was not simply based on a blueprint. There were thousands of materials in the world. If everyone could forge the same heavenly weapon, what would be the difference? In this aspect, no matter how bad the reputation of the King of Junk was, he was qualified to be Lin Yi's teacher. Lin Yi would definitely benefit a lot from observing and learning together. However, although he had agreed to it, Lin Yi estimated that it would take at least a few months to ask the King of Junk for help. That was because the time spent on forging weapons was far more than that on refining elixirs. Could easily take a few months or even 8 to 10 years. Moreover, Lin Yi had to deal with the newcomer's assessment in the Welcome Pavilion. He did not have that much free time. Therefore, he could only wait until the matter was over. Well, it's okay. Brother Lin, you can do as you please. The patience of a blacksmith is not for show. I can wait no matter how long it takes. The King of Junk did not care at all and kept nodding. For him, it was already a great thing that Lin Yi had agreed to let him forge weapons for him. As for waiting for a period of time, it was not a problem at all. He could wait no matter how long it took. At this moment, the King of Junk even began to think about which auxiliary materials to match the front claws and whip tail of the nine-tailed cloud-piercing bag. Although it was very difficult for him to get anything good with his ability, if he could use some of the scraps in the corner well, it could also have an unexpected magical effect. This was where his core value as an armament master was reflected. Chapter 37-36. What an eccentric scientist. Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh. Not only was he not offended, he even thought more highly of this guy because of this. After all, the profession of forging weapons was the same as alchemy. It was necessary to study hard. The more one could calm down and think deeply, the more likely he was to make a breakthrough. The eccentric character of the King of Junk might not be suitable for dealing with people, but it was not necessarily a bad thing for a forging weapon master. Lin Yi smiled and immediately ignored him. He turned around and walked to a secluded corner. After putting the bag of spirit jade and the front paw and tail of the cloud-piercing leopard into the space of the jade pendant, he then walked towards the inner street. At this time it was just in the middle of the morning. When Lin Yi walked to the entrance of the inner street, the guards had just moved out the sign for the inner street to signal the people who had been waiting here for a long time to enter. With the first batch of people pouring into the inner street, Lin Yi went straight to the Hong Chamber of Commerce. He couldn't wait to know whether the piece of star ink stone he had been longing for was still there. He entered the attic of the Hong Chamber of Commerce with familiarity, quickly walked up to the second floor, and went straight to the corner where he had found the star ink stone last time. However, when Lin Yi glanced at it, his heart immediately sank. The display case was empty, and the star ink stone was gone. Was he going to miss the opportunity in the end even though he had rushed over so quickly? Lin Yi smiled bitterly. Although he was unwilling, there was no other way. He was going to walk around casually and then go back. After all, it was his luck to get it, but it was his fate to lose it. He had already been mentally prepared for this. However, just as he was about to give up, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a staff member of the Hong Chamber of Commerce carrying an exquisite wooden box as he passed by. The mysterious aura emanating from the wooden box caused his heart to palpitate involuntarily. This situation was exactly the same as when he had discovered the star ink stone. Could it be that the star ink stone was in the wooden box? Lin Yi suddenly had a strong intuition. He hurriedly followed the footsteps of the staff, and then found that the box had been sent to a private room on the side. The last time Lin Yi came here, he had specifically asked around and found out that this private room was a place on the second floor that was specially used to trade valuables. After all, wealth should not be exposed. Some precious treasures that were worth hundreds or even thousands of spirit jade should be traded in a secret place, no matter if it was due to sentiment or reason. If it was placed in a crowded public place like the lobby on the first floor, it would easily attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. The Hong Chamber of Commerce was rich and powerful, so there was nothing to be afraid of. However, customers who had spent a large sum of spiritual jades might not have such confidence. If someone were to follow and launch a sneak attack after leaving the Hong Clan Merchant Association, not only would their treasures be stolen, but they would also be wasting a large amount of spiritual jades. In serious cases, they might even be killed. This was no laughing matter. Therefore, for the sake of protecting the customer's privacy, the Hong Chamber of Commerce had specially set up this private room specifically for the trading of valuable items. If a customer had his eye on any valuable treasure outside, he could just go in and discuss the deal with the shopkeeper. The staff of the Hong Chamber of Commerce would help him pack it up, and no outsiders would be able to see what was inside and have any ill intentions. The door to the private room was not tightly shut, it was only ajar. After all, as a businessman, they had to open their doors to welcome customers from all over the world. They could not possibly close down their other businesses just to protect the customers' privacy. That was unrealistic. To be able to specially set up a private room to help customers avoid unnecessary trouble, the Hong Chamber of Commerce was already very considerate. Through the ajar door, Lin Yi immediately saw a familiar figure inside, and his heart skipped a beat. This figure. It was the inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion that he had seen last time. Although he was dressed in ordinary clothes instead of the iconic attire of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, Lin Yi could still tell that this person was the same person as the one from last time. If he had only guessed that the wooden box might contain a star ink stone, then now, after seeing this competitor, Lin Yi was already completely certain that the contents of this wooden box were undoubtedly the star ink stone. Immediately after, Lin Yi heard the shopkeeper say to this person, "You can open it and check to see if it is what you want. If you are interested, then according to the previous price, it will be 1,000 spirit jades." Due to the large amount of spirit jades, the Hong Chamber of Commerce can send someone to your residence to collect it. 1,000 spirit jades, it was indeed a star ink stone. Lin Yi's heart jumped. After taking a deep breath, he walked into the private room before that person could finalize the deal with the shopkeeper. "Dear customer, what can I do for you?" The shopkeeper immediately turned and smiled at Lin Yi. Although he still had to take care of the deal with this person, this did not prevent him from entertaining Lin Yi. After all, anyone who had the confidence to enter a private room was a nouveau riche with a large amount of spirit jades in their hands. They were the gods of wealth that merchants like them needed to focus on entertaining and winning over. Before Lin Yi could reply, this inner sect disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion looked at him warily. Lin Yi recognized this person without a doubt. This person was the competitor for the star ink stone that he had seen last time, Wuxia. After glancing at Lin Yi, Wuxia also quickly recognized Lin Yi's identity. His heart was instantly filled with shock. He knew that since Lin Yi had appeared here at this time, his intentions were most likely the same as his own. He had also come for the star ink stone. Taking advantage of the fact that Lin Yi's gaze had yet to fall upon the wooden box, he quickly and calmly closed the lid, not wanting Lin Yi to see that the box contained a star ink stone. Although in his eyes, Lin Yi was nothing more than a poor wandering cultivator, and in theory, it was impossible for him to have so many spirit jades to purchase the star ink stone. Since Lin Yi had dared to enter this private room, it meant that he most likely had some confidence. Just in case, it was better to cover it up a little. After all, if Lin Yi really did discover the star ink stone in the wooden box and wanted to compete with him on the spot, that would be somewhat troublesome. Unbeknownst to him, Lin Yi had long since determined that the wooden box contained the star ink stone. At this time, no matter how much he tried to cover it up, it would be futile. However, Lin Yi's expression did not change, and he did not even glance in his direction. Instead, he directly said to the shopkeeper, "Shopkeeper, I saw a piece of star ink stone here last time. Do you still have it in stock?" When these words came out, the originally somewhat nervous Wuxia's heart immediately trembled. What he feared had really come. Being asked such a question by this fellow Lin Yi, how could a wily old fox like the shopkeeper, who had spent many years in the sea of business, not be unable to detect the business opportunity here? Chapter 37:37. This time, no matter how much Wuxia tried to hide it, it was useless. Looking at the shopkeeper's excited expression, looking at Lin Yi's loathsome face, he wanted to slap himself across the face. If he had known that someone like this would suddenly appear, he would not have said another word and immediately sealed the deal. There would have been no need to drag his feet and have someone bring the item over to inspect it. Now he had been too smart for his own good. He had been forced to the point where he had to compete with someone else. He had been caught in his own trap. But now that things had come to this, no matter how much regret he felt, it was useless. Right now, the most important thing was to obtain the star ink stone at all costs. This was his greatest hope for rising up in the future. If he missed this chance, he could only be mediocre for the rest of his life, so he definitely could not miss this opportunity. "Shopkeeper, I feel that you should first ask whether or not this person can actually produce 1,000 spirit jades. I am very doubtful of this." Wuxia glanced at Lin Yi with hidden enmity. The shopkeeper paused. After looking Lin Yi up and down, he also seemed to be a bit doubtful. After all, Lin Yi's ordinary appearance really did not seem like someone who could casually produce 1,000 spirit jades. Lin Yi smiled and placed the bag on his back in front of them. He opened the bag for the two of them to see that it was filled to the brim with high-quality spirit jades. This was something he had specially prepared before entering the inner street. Wuxia was instantly shocked. He truly did not think that this unassuming, poor wandering cultivator would be able to casually produce so many spirit jades. But when he looked closely, a hint of ridicule appeared on Wuxia's face. He laughed coldly and said, "This bag of spirit jades does look like a lot, but there's 1,000? I don't think it's even half. You have the nerve to take this out and make a fool of yourself?" The shopkeeper to the side carefully calculated, then nodded and said, "From what I can see, there are about 400 spirit jades in this bag. It is indeed quite far from 1,000 spirit jades. Dear customer, if you can only produce these spirit jades, then I can only say my apologies." Shopkeeper has a good eye. Lin Yi smiled faintly. There were indeed only 400 spirit jades in the bag. Even though he still had some in the space in his jade pendant, and had even gotten 200 from Chen Heihu, some of these spirit jades were waste jades with insufficient spirit jades. They had been thrown into the space in his jade pendant for a short time and hadn't had time to fill up their spirit jades. Since you cannot produce 1,000 spirit jades, then what are you doing here? Then why are we still here? What a waste of time. Hearing this, Wuxia couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Turning his head towards the shopkeeper, he said, "Since that's the case, then I'll pay 1,000 spirit jades." Indeed. The shopkeeper nodded with some regret. He had originally thought that it would be a great situation where two tigers would compete for food. He could earn quite a lot of spirit jades from this, but he didn't expect Lin Yi to only be a bystander, only able to take out 400 spirit jades. He wasn't competitive at all. However, just as the shopkeeper and Wuxia were about to complete the transaction, Lin Yi suddenly spoke up. "Wait, if it's more than 400 spirit jades, I'll sell it to you. What if I add on these 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills?" The two of them stared blankly. Then they saw that at some point in time, an antique little box had appeared in Lin Yi's hand. Wuxia's heart sank. Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were also sold in the Hong Merchant Guild, and they were priced at 400 spirit jades. In other words, these 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were worth 800 spirit jades. Adding on the bag of 400 spirit jades, Lin Yi's bid was equivalent to 1,200 spirit jades, far exceeding his 1,000 spirit jades. Of course, he didn't think that Lin Yi was bragging. Even though the box wasn't open, if there was nothing inside, then Lin Yi would be making a fool of himself. "Dear customer, what do you say?" The shopkeeper turned to look at Wuxia. His meaning was clear. If he couldn't make a higher bid, then this unique piece of star ink stone would belong to Lin Yi. Wuxia was silent for a moment. He glared fiercely at Lin Yi. He was determined to get the star ink stone, and he wouldn't allow anyone to encroach on it. However, Lin Yi didn't even look at him. In a place like this, spirit jades always spoke. Whoever had more spirit jades would have the right to speak. No matter how much Wuxia glared at him, it was useless. "I bid 1,200 spirit jades." Wuxia finally gritted his teeth and said, "The foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill is worth 400 spirit jades, but that's the selling price. I don't think it's that high to buy it back." 1,200 spirit jades. This was the upper limit of what he could borrow. It was impossible to add even one more. Because even if they wanted to borrow at a high interest rate, it depended on the person. If it was clearly beyond the upper limit of the person's ability to repay, they wouldn't lend it to you at all. Otherwise it would be all for naught. Even if you killed the other party, you wouldn't be able to recoup your capital. Although he, Wuxia, was an inner sect disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, his background wasn't as deep as that of a young master like Su Lingchong. Normally he could only borrow 1,000 spirit jades. Being able to borrow 200 more was already a favor price. Wanting to borrow more than that was impossible. However, although he could only offer 1,200 spirit jades, Wuxia was still confident that he could win this piece of star ink stone. Because although Lin Yi's 400 spirit jades and 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were also worth 1,200 spirit jades, one mustn't forget that the price of 1 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was 400 spirit jades. This was the Hong Merchant Guild's own selling price. In other words, to the Hong Merchant Guild, the cost of a foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill wasn't even 400 spirit jades. In their eyes, it was already at most worth 300 spirit jades. Therefore, the 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills that Lin Yi had taken out were at most worth 600 spirit jades. Adding on 400 spirit jades, it was actually equivalent to a bid of 1,000 spirit jades. Naturally, it couldn't compare to the 1,200 spirit jades he had. Actually, from this angle, Yuzha believed that a bid of 1,100 spirit jades would completely overshadow Lin Yi's. However, he still chose to directly raise the price to the limit that he could afford. In order to ensure that he could win the Star Ink Stone, he was throwing caution to the wind. As expected, the shopkeeper nodded and said to Lin Yi, "That's right. Although the price of the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill is 400 spirit jades, if you want to use it as payment, then it must be calculated according to the recovery price. I can only give you 300 spirit jades. 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spirit jades can only be considered as payment of 1,000 spirit jades." Chapter 37-38. By accepting Lin Yi's 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spirit jades, the Hong Merchant Association could save themselves the trouble of purchasing goods. But now that Yuzha had called out a price of 1,200, it was equivalent to the 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills being exchanged for spirit jades at the price of 400 per pill. Even the trouble of selling them would be saved. Yuzha looked at Lin Yi with a face full of mockery. He was already 90% sure that he would get this piece of inkstone. From what he saw, unless Lin Yi had no other choice, he definitely wouldn't take out 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills as a bargaining chip. This was probably the entire fortune of this poor wandering cultivator. There was no way he could take out more spirit jades than him. However, Lin Yi opened his mouth and asked in reply, "That's not necessarily the case, right? In the pill display cabinets outside, I saw the same pill with different prices. Could it be that these pills are all sold at the same price?" Hearing this before the shopkeeper could reply, Yuzha, who was at the side, couldn't help but laugh loudly. He pointed at Lin Yi and mocked, as expected of a poor wandering cultivator who hasn't seen the world. "Let me explain to you. Look at those high-priced pills, they're all imported from Middle Island. They're personally refined by a high-level alchemist there. How can they be the same price as locally produced ones? I don't know where you got your pills from, but how can they compare to Master Middle Island's?" "Ah." Lin Yi smiled faintly and didn't say anything to refute. He only opened the lid of the box in front of the 2 of them. Looking at the 2 snow-white pills with faint halos, the shopkeeper couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He hurriedly pounced forward to examine them carefully, even bringing a special magnifying glass from the side. However, Yuzha didn't see anything strange. Although he could recognize that these were Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills, he was just a normal cultivator after all. He wasn't a merchant who specialized in trading like the shopkeeper, and he definitely wasn't an expert alchemist. Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills were pills that he would only think of when he was breaking through a barrier. At other times he wouldn't even have the chance to come into contact with them. However, he saw the shopkeeper's unusual reaction. He was somewhat puzzled. Wasn't it just 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills? What was so rare about it? Although the value of the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill was not low, it was still a very common pill. If it was replaced with the Foundation Establishment pill, it would still be acceptable. Yuzha disapprovingly curled his lips, but for the sake of the Star Ink Stone, he could only patiently remind, "Shopkeeper, these are just 2 ordinary Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills. According to what you just said, they are worth at most 300 spirit jades each. Even if you add 400 spirit jades, they still can't compare to my bid of 1,200 spirit jades. Just by looking at this kid's poor appearance, you can tell that it's impossible for him to increase the price. What's there to hesitate about? Hurry up, don't waste time." His incessant chatter finally interrupted the shopkeeper's attempt to take a closer look. The shopkeeper stopped and looked at him with a strange expression. "Do you still think that this customer's foundation-breaking pellet is only worth 300 spirit jades?" Even though the shopkeeper hid his expression very well, Yuzha could still clearly feel the mockery hidden within. Yuzha's face reddened and he forcefully suppressed his anger. "Is it not?" The shopkeeper helplessly shook his head. Even though he felt disdain in his heart, as a businessman, amiability always brought wealth. If he didn't explain it clearly face to face, this Yuzha would probably continue to pester him. He could only patiently say, "You just said that even if it's the same Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill, how much it's worth depends on the quality, right?" "That's right, so what?" Yuzha suddenly had a bad feeling. The shopkeeper patiently explained, "Even if it's the same Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill, the quality is ordinary, so what?" The shopkeeper patiently explained, "Even if it's the same Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill, the quality is ordinary." It can only guarantee a breakthrough to the early stage of foundation establishment or the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. If you reach the middle stage of foundation establishment, it will be very difficult to have any obvious effect. So the recovery price is at most 300 spirit jades. But if it's imported from the middle island, the higher quality foundation establishment barrier breaking pill can guarantee a successful breakthrough even after the middle stage of foundation establishment. The recovery price can be over 400 spirit jades. So what? Shopkeeper, you can't be thinking of telling me that this poor loose cultivator somehow got his hands on a foundation establishment barrier breaking pill, and that the quality is comparable to Master Nakajima's foundation establishment barrier breaking pill, right? Yuja sneered as he glanced at Lin Yi. Lin Yi responded with a calm smile. He didn't take the other party's provocation to heart at all. Because he didn't need to say anything, there would naturally be people who would slap the other party's face for him. That's not it. The shopkeeper shook his head. Then that's incredible. Yuja's heart instantly relaxed. He was really afraid that this poor loose cultivator, Lin Yi, would somehow get his hands on two high-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. After all, although the probability of this happening wasn't high if he really ran into some dog-shit luck, there was still a trace of a possibility. However, before he could heave a sigh of relief, the shopkeeper gave him a meaningful look. His eyes seemed to be speechless and pitying at the same time. Only then did he open his mouth and continue, however, other than the normal and high-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills, there is also a type called the top quality. Miracle Dr. Dan Zhongliju's extreme quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was guaranteed to have 100% effect even in the later stages of the foundation. I'm sure you've heard of this before, sir? Miracle Dr. Dan Zhongliju, as a top-level character who came from the North Island, had long become a name card of the North Island. If a practitioner from the North Island hadn't heard of Zhongliju's story, then they would be too embarrassed to go out and meet people. Elixir God's product must be extreme quality. Yuja had heard this phrase countless times, and naturally he had heard of Liju's creation of the ultimate level foundation breaking elixir. It was said that back in the day Zhang Liju had casually sold a supreme grade foundation breaking pellet, and the price was easily raised to thousands of spirit jades. It didn't matter how many spirit jades you had, you might not even be able to get one. Normal high-quality foundation breaking pellets simply couldn't compare to it. What do you mean? Extreme quality foundation establishment barrier breaking pill? That's something only a elixir god like Master Zhang can make. Not only does it need to be sold for thousands of spirit jades, but it also needs a deep background to be able to buy it. What does it have to do with a poor loose cultivator like him? Yuja was confused after hearing the shopkeeper's words. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.